Yep.
Let's start to the day.
That's kind of like congressional breakfast, isn't it?
Well, Dunkin' Donuts is very New England, so I don't know.
They are?
Think about, oh,
They're
yeah,
not
it's a-
potato
They
donuts,
are
are they?
not our, but we have Maine potato donuts. We're very proud of them. No, they're, but Dunkin'
That kind of
Donuts.
confuses me. I thought potatoes came in from Idaho. Yeah.
They come from Minnesota.
Oh, nice try,
What's a
Betty.
potato donut?
Oh, well, I'll bring some in next week, believe me.
Oh, you're going to love them. Then I'll bring some in that are made with real potatoes.
Oh,
Well, you should have.
just wait till we get to the vodka.
If
I'm
it's
gonna
not-
tell you who's gonna win.
If it's not grown in Idaho, it's not really a potato. It's more of a tuber. I was going to buy her a bunch of potatoes in the store the other day, of the little blue and red ones that they have, you know, that are kind of garnishes, I guess, and say, "Here's your Maine potatoes." Now, I'm not gonna tease you about your crabs. They're good,
There-
lobsters and crabs and all that kind
Yeah,
of
there's
stuff.
no Idaho
There's
lobster.
nah, we do have some Idaho shrimp though.
Not that are safe to eat.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
kind of weird. They actually are at a place where they did geothermal. Department of Energy did some geothermal research years ago, and so it comes up and it's hot water and stuff. And guy grows warm water shrimp in it and stuff. They're actually pretty good, but just kind of weird. You know, there are just some things that ought to be kept to where they are. You know.
Yeah.
Anyway, committee will come to order. Good morning and welcome to the first of our public witness hearings dedicated to American Indian and Alaska Native programs. I believe these hearings are very important, and I thank each of you for being here today. I know it's hard sometimes to get here from all across the country. Indian country has been and will continue to be a bipartisan priority of this subcommittee. I look forward to working with Ranking Member Pingree to continue to strengthen this committee's longstanding efforts to increase the federal commitment to honor our treaty and trust responsibility with American Indians and Alaska Natives. I would like to welcome all of the distinguished tribal leaders and other leaders here today. Thank you all to all of our witnesses for appearing before the committee and sharing your concerns and personal perspectives on these important topics. In terms of hearing logistics, I will call each panel of witnesses to the table, one panel at a time. I will generally call it by panel 1 or panel 2 or panel 3, because if I try to pronounce the names, I'll just screw it up. So each witness will have 5 minutes to present testimony. Your full written testimony will be included in the record, so please don't feel pressured to cover everything in 5 minutes. We will be using a timer to track the progress of each witnesses. When the lights turn orange, the witness will have 1 minute remaining to conclude their remarks. When the light turns red, I will have to ask the witness to stop to remain on schedule. We have about 80, I think, witnesses over today and tomorrow, so we have a lot to go through. And believe me, it's very important to us to hear from the tribes and what's happening in their area from their perspective and stuff. We'll hear from every witness on each panel before members will be provided an opportunity to ask questions. Because we have a full day ahead, I request that we try to keep things moving so we can stay on schedule and respect each other's time. And eventually I'll be able to turn this page. It's what happens when you get old. Your fingers don't work anymore. I also want to note that committee rules prohibit the use of outside cameras and audio equipment during these hearings. The hearing can be viewed in its entirety on the committee's website, and an official hearing transcript will be available at gop.gov. With that, I thank all of you for being here today, and I'm happy to yield now to our distinguished ranking member for any remarks that she may wish to make.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to echo his welcome to this first day of public witness hearings on tribal programs under the jurisdiction of an Interior Environment Appropriations Subcommittee. And I want to thank the chair for setting up these 2 days of hearings and for his strong support of Indian country. I want to thank you and all of our future witnesses for traveling to Washington, D.C. to testify before our subcommittee. We really do appreciate it. We know you have busy lives and you come a long way, so thank you very much for your time. We are all looking forward to hearing your thoughts about the needs and challenges facing Indian country and about your priorities for the Interior Bill. It will certainly help to inform us as we write the 2025 Appropriations Bill. And with that, I yield back to the chair.
Thank you, Ranking Member Pingree. I'll now call our first panel to the table, who's already at the table, and our first witness will be someone I know very well, Lewan Tyler from Fort Hall Business Council. Thank you for being here today, and you may begin.
All right, thank you. Zango Bechiku. Good morning, Abishaya Wawas. Good morning. My name is Lewan Tyler, and I am the chairman of the Fort Hall Business Council, the governing body of the Shoshone-Bannock tribes. Before I start, I want to thank the Honorable Mike Simpson, who is our representative, for his continued efforts on behalf of the Shoshone-Bannock tribes and of Indian country to uphold the treaty and trust responsibility. Today, I will focus on 1, the Game Mine Superfund site located on our reservation, 2, law enforcement funding, and 3, BIA road maintenance funding. The Game Mine Superfund site is an open pit phosphate mine covering 7,000 acres of our reservation land that opened in 1946 and closed in 1993. It has 158 pits, each ranging in size from 15 to 20 acres, many with high walls 50 feet or more, and many with contaminated pit lakes. There is also 30 million tons of waste over this area. Since the mine closed over 30 years ago, very little reclamation work has been done to reslope the land to make it usable again. And only recently has the EPA begun environmental remediation work to address the contamination caused by the mine. While the EPA remediation process is underway, the tribes would like to lead a strategic study to plan the reclamation of the site in order to best use the area for the tribes in the future. I want to thank this subcommittee for including report language last year directing the Bureau of Land Management to engage the tribes in this reclamation study. Unfortunately, that report language did not make it in the final bill. When Game Mine was leased in the 1940s, the tribes never thought that when the mine closed, we would never be able to use this land again. We again asked for your help in reclaiming our reservation land by directing the BLM to work with the tribes to undertake a strategic reclamation study of Game Mine. Turning the need for more funding for law enforcement and turning to this area, under the BIA formula guidelines, the Fort Hall Police Department should have 25 officers. But due to severe underfunding, our department has just 14 total officers. At this staffing level, our department can only have 2 officers patrolling 550,000 acres reservation that covers 4 counties during each 12-hour shift. This is a serious public safety problem for our tribal members. It also creates a huge strain on our officers, with many getting burned out and leaving for other agencies with less stress and more pay. Recently, the BIA issued a report on funding levels as required by the Tribal Law and Order Act. This report shows that the level of need for law enforcement across Indian country is over $1.7 billion, but the BIA is funded at just $256 million. This massive underfunding of law enforcement is leading to dangerous conditions on the Fort Hall Reservation and throughout Indian country. We ask that the subcommittee honor the treaty and trust responsibility by providing law enforcement funding at the level of need in the BIA report. Finally, I want to talk about continued need for increases in road maintenance funding. I want to thank the subcommittee for trying to increase funding for the BIA's roads maintenance program last year. Unfortunately, that funding increase was not included in the final bill, and road maintenance was again funded at $39.2 million. At this level, our transportation department cannot make the necessary repairs to our roads. Due to the lack of funding, as some paved roads fail, we are having to turn them into gravel roads. The bipartisan infrastructure law authorized funding for the BIA road maintenance program at $56 million for FY25. This additional funding is absolutely critical to maintaining our roads. We ask that the subcommittee fund the BIA road maintenance program at the authorized level of $56 million. So we appreciate your time and thank you for this opportunity to come over here and testify, and God bless you all and have a great day. How's that?
Thank you, Lee. I appreciate that very much.
Yeah.
Whitney.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ani Bojo, Giweden Nagabo Quain Dishnakas, Ganushnakani Nindonjaba. My name is the woman who stands in the north. My English name is Whitney Gravel, and I currently serve as the president of Bay Mills Indian Community. I am here today as a representative of the Chippewa-Ottawa Resource Authority, and I testify before you to emphasize the critical importance of federal funding for the exercise of reserved treaty rights and the management of natural resources protected by treaties throughout the Great Lakes. The Chippewa-Ottawa Resource Authority is a treaty regulatory body that comprises 5 federally recognized tribal nations in the state of Michigan, united under the 1836 Treaty of Washington with the United States. These tribes, including mine, have fought for decades to preserve our rights to hunt, fish, and gather in our ancestral territories. This battle has involved many legal challenges, resulting in landmark court decisions affirming our treaty rights. It is understood collectively that the rights forged under the 1836 Treaty of Washington are the bedrock of our cultural identity and our sustenance. I give great thanks to my ancestors that helped negotiate this treaty, for despite ceding 14 million acres of land and 13 million acres of water to the United States for the creation of the state of Michigan, they protected what was most important for our continued existence of our people. That was the usual privileges of occupancy, the ability to simply live an indigenous way of life. The ceded lands comprise more than 40% of what is modern-day Michigan and are still the continued homelands of my people. The funding we receive through the Rights Protection Implementation Program is essential for protecting and preserving our ability to sustainably manage these natural resources. Our treaty rights extend just beyond fishing in the waters of the Great Lakes. They are a reaffirmation of what our ancestors negotiated long ago. They encompass hunting, fishing, trapping, gathering, picking blueberries, eating strawberries, all throughout the ceded territory, both inland and in the waters of the Great Lakes. But they also encompass the ability to teach our children, to feed our elders, and to pass on our culture. They recognize this exclusive right to regulate these activities and allocate harvest opportunities so that we can put food on the table for our families. Together with the state of Michigan and the United States, the Chippewa-Ottawa Resource Authority has been managing the ceded territory and regulating all treaty activity in the Great Lakes since 1985. We have negotiated multiple successor Great Lakes fishing decrees and recently began negotiations for a third agreement in the fall of 2019. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic, we were able to learn how to use Zoom and continue negotiations throughout that period of time, which then resulted in a new and proposed Great Lakes fishing decree, which was ordered by the court in August of 2023. And it is now time to implement that new decree. Implementation not only supports a wide range of activities, but also establishes conservation-based regulations, monitoring of critical fishery and wildlife populations, as well as creates enforcement and conservation laws throughout the ceded territory. It also supports vital initiatives to address ecological stresses inflicted by climate change, from monitoring and mitigating invasive species to implementing adaptive management strategies. These funds are extremely critical for ensuring the resilience and sustainability of our natural resources, as well as for the continued existence of our people. Without adequate funding, we risk severe cuts to these essential programs, leading to the increased conflicts and reduced protection of our natural resources. If you can help us protect the Great Lakes, we will protect it for everyone else. I urge you to prioritize funding for the rights protection implementation in the FY 2025 and allocate additional funds to the Chippewa-Ottawa Resource Authority for implementation of the new Great Lakes fishing decree. This funding is not only vital to uphold our treaty rights, preserve our cultural heritage, ensure the sustainability of our natural resources, but also so that we can continue to teach those children and their children for many generations to come what it means to be Great Lakes Anishinaabe. So thank you for your consideration of this request. Chi-miigwech.
Thank you, Whitney. Kirk?
Thank you. Good morning. Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree.
Kirk, if you would, could you explain what the United South and Eastern Tribes Sovereignty Protection Fund is?
Happy to. The United South and Eastern Tribes Sovereignty Protection Fund is a organization that's made up of 33 tribal nations from Maine to Florida over to Texas, and focusing primarily on our relationship with the United States government. So again, sir, it's good to see you this morning, Ranking Member Pingree, as always, and members of the subcommittee, and thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony. I am Kirk Francis. I am the chief of the Penobscot Indian Nation in the great state of Maine, the potato capital of the world, by the way.
I knew I was starting to find
And the president of the United South and Eastern Tribes Sovereignty Protection Fund. Tribal nations appear before you on the heels of another foreign aid package that has sent tens of billions of dollars overseas. Since 2022, Ukraine alone has received $135 billion from the U.S. government. I raise this issue not because we feel this aid is unnecessary, but because this is a frustrating reminder that, in spite of barriers like deficits and procedural rules, Congress is capable of finding billions of dollars in flexible funds for other units of government, including foreign governments. However, year after year, Indian country is expected to advocate for the funding that we are owed by this country, only to receive minor increases and burdensome requirements for its use. These increases fail to address the chronic underfunding of trust and treaty obligations and often fail to account for inflation. As the U.S. works to support and rebuild its allies, it must work to provide the same support and restoration to the domestic nations within its own borders, including through a Marshall Plan for tribal nations. You are already well aware of our history and the federal government's ongoing failure to honor its obligations. We remind you that our relationship with this country is ultimately about honor, fulfilling commitments and promises. To that end, we offer solutions representing a fundamental shift in federal Indian policy and funding. They will allow Indian country to realize its great potential and create lasting, positive change for tribal nations and our people. In pursuit of this change, we extend our strong support to the full implementation of Executive Order 14112 and ask that you join us in working to ensure this executive order is meaningfully implemented across the federal agencies. In the short term, the EO will result in greater deference to tribal decision-making and improved services across Indian country through funding flexibilities. In the long term, proper implementation will provide the detail necessary for the subcommittee to advocate for additional funding for tribal nations. We urge you to not only exercise oversight as this EO is implemented, but to also support the legislative change and increased appropriations necessary for it to be successful. Appropriators must work with Indian country to achieve mandatory funding for federal Indian agencies and programs. We continue to appreciate certainty and stability for IHS under advance appropriations, but this is a temporary solution. Full and mandatory funding for agencies like IHS and BIA better honors your obligations to Indian country and will truly change conditions for our people. We should start immediately with mandatory funding for CSC and 105L so that appropriations increases go towards services and not binding federal obligations. Relatedly, the processes under which OMB develops budgets and policies that impact us require reform. In concert with its newly established Tribal Affairs Advisor, a position that must be made permanent, OMB must be required to produce a full, detailed accounting of the funding distributed to Indian country. In that funding, comparing what actually tribal nations can access against what is factually received. Congress should also work with OMB to hold states accountable for any pass-through dollars that are intended for tribal nations. Finally, in addition to our regional priorities for IHS and BIA, we extend our support to the following: the President's proposal for a tribal land and water conservation fund and a consolidated grant program at ACF, funding and permanency for the Treasury's Office of Tribal and Native Affairs, OMB's Tribal Affairs Office, and the White House Council on Native American Affairs, and the following additional policy changes: a special behavioral health program at IHS, payment in lieu of taxes for tribal trust land acquisition, increased funding for tribal historic preservation, and interagency transfer authority for tribal funding. We call upon Congress and this subcommittee in particular to work with tribal nations and the administration to fulfill the government's trust and treaty obligations through the federal budget. While each member of Congress shares equally in these obligations, you have a unique understanding of this responsibility and, more importantly, the opportunity to drive historic change. We urge you to lead this change within Congress and improve how the United States views, honors, and fulfills its promises to Indian country. And again, it's my pleasure to be here, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Lee, it doesn't surprise me that we have kind of the same issues that we've been working on for a long time. We've got to get the high walls down. And I'm going to be around when, I don't know if I'll be around when it starts or when it finishes, but I'm going to be around while it starts, because we're going to get that done. Law enforcement, you and I have talked about before, both law enforcement and firefighting. We appropriate, or you hire law enforcement and firefighting people, and with Pocatello being 12 miles south of you and Blackfoot being 12 miles north of you, as soon as you train them up, they get more pay, and that's where they go. And so you're a training ground for these, and somehow we got to change that. And that's something we've talked about in the past. Interesting that you brought up roads. I will tell you the story that Miss McCullum and I were out on the Navajo reservation, and they took us out to a school on a dirt road and stuff. We both had Fitbits on. We sat in the bus that took us out there. I got 50,000 steps just sitting in the bus. That's how bad the road was and stuff. But I know that Mr. Cole, our full committee chairman now, is very interested in that, and he bumped the roads budget in the transportation bill, and I'm sure that we'll be looking at that again, because roads are a big thing. So thank you for being here, and I talk to you all the time. So you brought up one thing that I'm going to mention it here. I don't expect anybody to answer it right now, because it's something I want everyone to think about. I've been asked by several tribes, why do we fund the Indian Health Services when money comes off the top through that party, through their administration and stuff, and some tribes that have talked to me believe that they could deliver more services by direct appropriation to the tribes and stuff like that. That's a complicated subject. And it's different for different tribes. Our goal is to make sure that we get the money that we are appropriating to tribes for health services, we get the biggest bang for the buck that we can. And so I want all of the tribes, and we'll be sending out some letters to the tribes and stuff and asking them to respond what they think. I don't know if it's a good idea or a bad idea. All I'm trying to do is get the best services that we can for the money that we're spending, and I'd like to hear from the different tribes, and I suspect it's going to be different from smaller tribes to larger tribes and stuff. So that's an issue that nobody cares about Indian Health Services and their members' services than the tribes do. So that's a question that will be coming up. But thank you all for being here today, Ms. Pingree.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all of you for your testimony. Good to learn a little bit more about the challenges that are being faced back in the chairman's home state, and I hope we can do more to help with that cleanup. That's really a devastating description of the amount of waste that you have to deal with, and the fact that it has never been cleaned up. So maybe between the work we do on this committee and also with the EPA, we can give that a little push. And good to hear about the work you're doing on the fishing in the Great Lakes. I'm originally from Minnesota, so my heart is still a little bit in the Great Lakes, even though I'm solidly saltwater now. But still, I agree with you with your ending statement that if you have the right to manage the species and the water, you'll do a very good job. So we'll be happy to help on that. And Chief Francis, really appreciate your coming here from Maine. And I know we'll have a chance to hear again a little bit from the Penobscots later today, but I really appreciate your taking sort of the USET point of view and this broader picture, because that's not something we get to do that much in this committee, is sort of back up and say, it's a really good point. We all care deeply about making sure we got funding to Ukraine, but we often don't think about how we get beyond just like, oh, maybe we can eke this up 2 million here and 6 million there, and really, really getting into meeting our treaty obligations. And you touched on so many different points of view. I'd like to have a follow-up conversation really sometime with this committee, just to sort of think about, like, how do we get, because I think many of our colleagues do turn to us and think, like, well, what else should we be doing? They know there are issues in their home state and that our funding levels are not enough. And even just the process, looking at OMB, how it does things, how we oversee these things. So you brought up way too many points for me to kind of go through, but I think we really should have a follow-up conversation, especially with the people on this committee who've been working on these issues for a long time and sort of seen the frustration of, we're not doing enough here, the roads. I mean, we talk about the law enforcement issue every single time and the shortage, and, it's not a moment in time where we can just let that slide. As you said, if this was if this was a big city in the United States, you know, we'd be all over it, talking about it every day on the floor. What are we doing about this? And yet we've got communities all over the country that don't have sufficient law enforcement and certainly aren't getting the resources that they need. So thank you so much for your thoughts. And I don't want to let that go. I want to dig in on that. So thank you. Yield back.
Mr. Ozzie? Thank you all for being here. Ms. McCollum?
Well, thank you all for your testimony. We started working when I first came on the committee. I think it was Mr. Cole who was chair at the time, trying to get OMB to give us an accounting. And we've had some success, but the challenge for tribes, especially smaller tribes, but it's a challenge for all tribes, is there's money in judiciary, there's money in ag, there's money here, and there's money in the Health and Human Services bill. It's all over, and to ask a tribe to write all these different grants and try to make them match up at the same time to do something is really a Herculean task. And you're absolutely right. There's more that we can do on that. So thank you for bringing that up again. Mr. Chair, I'm ready to go to school because I know a little bit about mining and mine reclamation because of other members who have served on this committee, Mr. Rogers and that. But the Bureau of Land Management, I know, sometimes helps write the leases. So did they write a good lease to make sure that we can get everything back is something. I'm a history teacher. I already know the answer, but I'm supposed to look for the facts first. So I'd like to learn more about that and work with you on that. I want to talk about the funding for the tribes in the state passed through, especially with you, Mr. Francis, because in Maine, after we passed VAWA, the Women Against Violence Act, we did a set-aside in this committee, and your tribe was not able to access it. Could you just let the committee know how Minnesota during COVID, we did everything right with the tribes. We've been passing everything direct, not taking anything off in Minnesota, but then you have the exact opposite in Maine. Would you just briefly tell the committee what happens in Maine when the federal government thinks that we're getting money to honor our trust and treaty obligations?
Sure, and thank you. And I think it's a good example of kind of what we're saying in terms of OMB's crosscut. They talk about a $20 billion figure that gets out to Indian country. We really know it's not half of that actually reaches Indian communities. So like in Maine, for example, you guys did a great job addressing opioid funding, for example, and getting opioid funds into states. We've not received a dollar of those funds through state government in Maine. We've also not received any money, as the Congresswoman points out, in dealing with the Violence Against Women program. However, I want to thank you all for your fix of that a few years ago in the reauthorization and including the Maine tribes. That was extremely important and historic, so we appreciate that. So it's an example of tribes all across the country really struggling, whether they're PL 280s, self-governing tribes, whatever the statutes are in their state. Fundings, I think it's just Congress needs to understand that with all the well intentions, it's not reaching everybody, and that states need, in their reporting, I think, to be held more accountable in terms of what demographic of people are actually being reached that the funding is intended for.
And Mr. Chair, before I conclude, I want to thank you for your testimony on behalf of the Great Lakes. We heard all about Idaho and Maine and their potatoes, but nobody can beat our water. So thank you for the work you do on that, and we're looking to see what we can do more. I took some more notes, and we'll be talking with the GWIFLEC and others that all work together on those issues. So, miigwech.
Thank you.
Quickly, yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to share real quickly the Public Law 83, Public Law 280. And since 1963, it was forced on us in Idaho. And I'd like to know, you're talking about direct funding. Is that funding actually coming to those 7 areas of the concurrent jurisdiction? Yeah. And it should be like investigation, because I don't know, where's all that money going to those 4 counties? And then looking at those 4 areas up there, Department of Interior, EPA, and Forest Service, the Department of Agriculture, and the Indian Health Service. That's all part of life, and we want to make sure that's all protected for our resources of our reservations, medicinal plants, et cetera. But I'm really honored to be here as well, and appreciate your time.
Thank you. Whitney, what kind of fish is that on your beadwork?
This is a pike, so Ganush-Nakaning's where I'm from is the place of northern pike, so that's here
Okay.
representing the fish in the Great Lakes.
Great, I appreciate it. I will tell you that we're going to hold a hearing later on this year on missing and murdered Indian women. It's a huge problem in this country. We lose 6,000 people. If that was any other subpopulation, there would be an outrage across this country, but not many people know that. And I think we need to delve into it, and you're going to find, I think, that the fact that, as was mentioned, you got very, very few police officers in a lot of large reservations that they cover and stuff. So it's going to be Congress needs to do something about that. Needs to focus on that, but I think it's going to come down in large part to the funding and the relationship with the FBI and that kind of stuff. And I'll tell you one quick story before we get on to the next panel. I was holding probably shouldn't say this, a fundraiser one day, and Lee came over to it, and I was talking at this fundraiser about how the far left and the far right in Congress are kind of at odds, and they, make it hard to get anything done and all that kind of stuff. At the end, Lee stood up, and he had a beaded necklace on it. It had a big eagle on it. Beautiful piece of beadwork. And he said, I want you to know this magnificent bird has a left wing and it has a right wing, and it can only fly if both wings work together. Which is something to think about.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you all for being here today. I appreciate it very much. Panel number 2.
You just got to talk to the chief for a minute so that he can be in charge.
I'm gonna go around. I can't reach.
Mr. Johnson, Mr. Siki, Mr. Dupuy, and Mr. Shalander. See that girl that was sitting here? Her name's Echo. I went to school with her father, and he worked at that gay mine, and
For you, Kevin.
yeah. 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 Mr. Johnson, you're first.
Good morning, Chair Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, and good morning to Congresswoman McCollum. It's good to see you. My name is Grant Johnson. I'm the president of the Prairie Island Indian Community. Our tribe is grateful to be invited to testify today, and we thank you for your efforts to ensure that Indian country receives the funding it so desperately needs. While our tribe and our Mdewakanton Dakota ancestors have lived along the banks of the Mississippi River for countless generations, the federal government took all the lands from us in the 19th century. The Department of Interior later reversed course and acquired land for our tribe on an island known as Prairie Island in the Mississippi River. Today, that land forms the core of our reservation. Unfortunately, the federal government also built and licensed infrastructure projects on and adjacent to Prairie Island that benefit other communities at our expense. More specifically, we are burdened by a federal dam that contributes to the repeated flooding of our reservation. The federal government's National Weather Service characterizes the worst level of flooding as a major flood event. Our reservation has been subject to 4 major flood events in the last 3 decades. The most recent one occurring just last year in 2023. During these events, as well as in years with the lower but still damaging flood levels, we are forced to use our own financial and human resources to build temporary barriers and to take other actions to try to protect homes, sacred and cultural sites, government offices, and tribal businesses. Making matters worse, since the early 1970s, the federal government has licensed the continued operation of a nuclear power plant less than 700 yards from our reservation, despite the tribe's long-standing objections. Even though this nuclear plant is already one of the oldest in the United States, its operators are now petitioning to extend its license to 2054. Further, the federal government licensed the storage of more than 1,000 tons of nuclear waste at the plant over the express objections of the tribe and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Plant operators are now petitioning to expand this nuclear waste storage to as much as 2,100 tons. Finally, trains carrying hazardous materials cross our reservation and often block the only access on and off Prairie Island, even in emergency situations. We are constantly concerned about what would happen if our members, business patrons, and employees are unable to evacuate the island in a nuclear or flooding emergency due to rail traffic. Separately and together, these three infrastructure projects continuously endanger the health and safety of our members and the viability of the tribal businesses that provide the bulk of the revenue to fund our government. We know of no other community in America forced to live in such close proximity to these threats. It is against this backup that we urge the subcommittee to prioritize three categories for federal funding. First, we are in desperate need of relocation funds. Our tribe has had no choice but to seek additional reservation land to remove ourselves from the threats I have just described. We used our own money to buy land known as Elk Run that is located within our historic territory and within 50 miles of Prairie Island, consistent with an agreement we have with the state of Minnesota. We need federal funding to build infrastructure and homes on this land. Unfortunately, existing federal funding for tribal relocation is woefully inadequate, and nearly all such funding has been directed to addressing land loss caused by climate change. The Prairie Island Indian community's relocation needs are necessitated not just by climate change, but most fundamentally by hazards caused by federal constructed and licensed infrastructure projects. We urge Congress to make relocation funding available to tribes with environmental justice threats like ours. Second, we urge that more federal funding needs to be available to support law enforcement in the country. In light of the severe threats faced by our tribe, adequate law enforcement, public safety, emergency response infrastructure is critical for the protection of our citizens, patrons, and employees. The BIA has long reported that Indian country law enforcement funding is adequate, and we urge Congress to prioritize funding to meet these public safety needs. We note we have submitted a community project funding request for an updated mobile command vehicle for our first responders to use in an emergency. Finally, we need funding for the preparation of a comprehensive emergency plan. Without adequate planning, chaos inherently follows a nuclear event, catastrophic flooding, or hazardous substance release from a train derailment. We need a single point of contact to help coordinate the multiple federal agencies that would be involved, and we need funding for the development of a federal emergency plan. Our funding request is compelled by the federal government's general trust responsibility to our tribe, particularly given that the grave threats we face are federally created. Thank you for your time today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Good morning. Anin busho sa wana base medicine kaso chubemane kaso an megisin dute mitu bashing mamas kasai kana gintu chuba kimi ko chene nugo ma chuga kanun nago eshnun da seang do in chuba gitum skwa kami sai kana chubna be ma decision shina be mina. Good afternoon to all our friends here. I am Daryl Siki Sr., Chairman of the Red Lake Nation. This is my third term as chairman, and I am proud to say this subcommittee has always worked in bipartisan manner to do the best they can for Indian country, and I believe in all of you to continue this tradition. Today I want to talk about 4 appropriation requests. These funding requests would help improve the lives of Red Lake 17,000 plus members. First, we support the Tribal Interior Budget Council's recommendation based on latest TLOA report to Congress for additional $1.1 billion for tribal law enforcement. $1.1 billion for tribal courts, $103 million for detention operations, and $8.5 million specifically for Red Lake law enforcement. Red Lake is in the midst of opiate crisis spurred by the non-Indian drug dealers. Red Lake law enforcement is doing their best, but they are hamstrung by two things. One, our BIA funding is way too low. Our BIA public safety expenditures were $8.5 million more than the BIA provided over the last 2 years. Two, we cannot arrest and detain non-Indians. The drug dealers know this, and they keep coming back. Congress needs to authorize tribal police to arrest, detain non-Indian drug dealers. The 1978 Oliphant law has to be changed so tribes can arrest and detain non-members that are hurting our people, that are violating our tribal laws. Second, we request that you fully fund and expand Make Permanent BIA's Tiwahi initiative, that Tiwahi be declared an official government policy. Tiwahi addresses many vital needs in our community, from youth suicide prevention efforts, allowing our Children's Healing Center to implement a 27 youth residential treatment program for mental health and substance abuse, efforts to combat tribal members' unemployment rates. I just returned from the 3rd National Tiwahi Conference, and there were more than 250 attendees sharing their success stories and dreams of strengthening families. Thanks to you, last year BIA was able to onboard 4 more Tiwahi sites, bringing the number of 10 sites and 65 tribes. And this year BIA was able to provide one-time funds to 12 Tiwahi incubator sites to enable them to develop Tiwahi implementation plans so they will be ready to become full Tiwahi sites when Congress provides additional funds. The President has requested additional Tiwahi funding, and we ask for your support to expand Tiwahi to more tribes. Third, we request financial assistance for Red Lake's crumbling water and wastewater infrastructure system. Most of this infrastructure dates back to the 1960s, and the lines are made of asbestos, cement, and are seriously deteriorating. Our projects have been unable to get on the IHS sanitation deficiency list because IHS prioritizes projects where houses are cramped together to provide more service per mile. This IH policy unfairly harms Red Lake, and we have nowhere else to go for financial assistance. We have 6 projects totaling $39 million that are shovel-ready, and we request this amount in FY 2025. Fourth, as I have raised in the past years, you must direct the IHS to immediately include both depreciation principal interest payments for eligible 105 lease facilities, just as BIA does. In my hand, I have the Red Lake Nation treaties and agreements outlining the federal trust responsibility to the tribes. You must continue to enforce these agreements, and I renew my call that the funding honoring these treaties must be mandatory and discretionary. In my right hand, I have the United States Constitution of America. Article 6, treaties were adopted. It's the supreme law of the land. Promises were given to tribes, but always broken promises, and we are forgotten. Do the right thing. Miigwech for allowing me to request your support for some of our most immediate needs at Red Lake as you enact F-2025 appropriations that direct impact my constituents. And I want to say we are a nation within a nation. We are exercising our sovereignty inherent to self-govern. Miigwech.
Thank you, Chairman, and welcome home. Chairman Kevin Dupuy of the Fond du Lac Band of the Lake Superior Chippewa and an 8-year Marine. Over to you, sir.
Bonjour. Nagani mus indigenous cause nagacho na muni joba ngizi dedam. We do kawisho ngom dashko to invite you. Hello, my name is Kevin Dupuy. I'm the Fond du Lac Chairman. I'd just like to say thank you, Chairman Simpson and Ranking Member Pingree. I have come here for many, many years, and I don't think there's anything that I can say today that you haven't already heard from tribal members throughout the country over the years. But what I want to do is bring up is the reality of the things that people request, including Fond du Lac and other tribes. We listened to my brother to my left here, Chairman Siki. I've known him for many years and working together with him, and hearing the issues of my brother over here from Prairie Island, my brother here from LCO, and listening to what they all have to say and prior tribal leadership that have come in front of them. Again, what you've been hearing is nothing new. It's a continuation, and I heard comments earlier when I was sitting there on why these things are the way that they are. I don't know what the reason is why the way they are, but the simplicity is this. We're dual citizens when the Act in 1924. And people forget that. Individual states forget that. They still have a duty and responsibility based on that dual citizenship. And to Chairman Siki's point, the treaty rights and reserve rights, trust responsibility is supreme law of the land. And when every time we go into a perspective to talk about what we need and what we want for our reservations in our home, it seems that we have this bureaucracy that sits in front of us. But the reality is this, we are a people too. And I need to say the way that I feel. We see you, but does everybody see us? And we live in every direction we turn, to the forward, to the back, to our left, or to our right. We're looking at somebody who surrounds us. And the question always comes up from my brother, Kevin Jensfield from Upper Sioux, is them being visible. I'm not going to use that term invisible. I'm just going to make the basic term of the simplicity of saying, do you see us? Our land, our resources, everybody wants. Everybody's used. Treaty rights, usufructuary rights, things that have been taken out of the ground, granite, marble, to build these great, huge, beautiful buildings in every city in the country. And that resource has been taken, and sometimes it's to the point that we're just asking for it back. If somebody's done using it and destroyed it the way it is, give it back to us so we can build land mass. The other thing is when we take a look at the reality, we talked about VAWA. That's a very big thing in Indian country. We have our own police departments, we have our own law enforcement, we have our own court systems, but we're still looked at as second class compared to everything else. If we were a regular municipality, to your words, ma'am, why don't we be treated like everybody else? And the issue is the original inhabitants of this land. We have a true identity, we have a language, we have a culture. And it needs to be understood. If we can look at, and the law says that we have true sovereignty and legitimate governments, then why aren't we looked at as true legitimate governments? Why are we the only group of people that really has to come up front and ask for help? When the reality is if we were treated basically the same as everybody else and looked at the same, we wouldn't be doing these things. But as this unique political entity that we are, under that principles, and we understand that, then we're going to come here every year and we're going to ask for these things. And it's not a point of asking anymore. It's got to be a demand. Our people are dying in alarming rates. If we only make up 1% of the population in the state of Minnesota, and there's 5.7 million people, and we have the highest disparities of anywhere, we have to do the math. We have to do the math. If every assessment is done on a disparity sheet and it's based on 100,000, and the tribal membership in the state of Minnesota is federally recognized tribes of 11 bands and tribes in the state, we don't make up 100,000. So in theory, we're not part of anybody's formula. But these numbers are used to generate revenue throughout, and we're the ones not getting the revenue. So if we make up 12% of the homeless population in the state of Minnesota, why aren't we getting 12% of the funding? If we make up 34.7% of the suicide rate in the state of Minnesota, then why aren't we receiving 34.7% of the suicide prevention revenue? It's a simple math issue, and when in reality, we try to do what is best for our people. And again, I didn't want to come here and talk about things that you guys have already heard, and you're going to hear it 1,000 more times. But these are the things that we need to understand, that we're here. And does everybody see us? And if everybody truly does see us, then everybody has to come to the table and listen to what we have to say and find resolve to the issues that we have. Miigwech.
Thank you, Kevin. Jason?
Koida Shamani Jan Shinabe Dug and Denoi Magani Duguma
Nindash manidu nudin indigenous cause baju and do dame mudawaza gaiganing and doing jiba. Nungum sugo weni dash osa alpaneguna nimigochuyana nikagumani dug. Niwijagana shimbunki. So good morning, everybody. My name is Jason Schlender. I'm the Executive Administrator of the Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, and also Distinguished Member McCollum from the state of Minnesota. The Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission recently celebrated the 40th anniversary of its founding, and of the 7th Circuit opinion reaffirming the rights guaranteed in treaties of 1837 and 42. We also celebrated this year the 25th anniversary of the Supreme Court's reaffirmation of our treaty rights in the Mille Lacs versus Minnesota case. We truly appreciate Congress and this committee's support over the years. That support not only allows tribes to exercise their right to self-governance and the implementation of federal court orders that resulted from litigation, but also helps to fulfill the United States obligation under those treaties. As you know, GLFWC's fundamental job relates to the assistance of implementation of our treaty rights, with whether it's issuing harvest permits, monitoring harvest, enforcing tribal laws, and ensuring safety of our tribal members. And we do that work well. But we also strive to meet the myriad of challenges that face us by remaining creative, innovative, and responsive. From climate change to non-native beings, the threats to treaty resources are many. One current challenge, less directly related to environmental conditions, but which is equally, if not more important, relates to the transferring knowledge and cultural practices to the next generation of Ojibwe and Anishinaabe people. What good are our treaty rights if our youth have lost connection to their culture, their lifeways, and the ability to harvest and consume healthy food? One way GLFWC seeks to meet that challenge is through community outreach, which is organized and facilitated by our conservation enforcement officers. Every summer, 50 middle school-aged tribal members attend our Camp Onjia King in the Odawa National Forest. They learn cultural teachings, harvesting techniques, and develop an appreciation for the outdoors. Unfortunately, the continuation of this camp may be in jeopardy. GLFWC has a vacancy rate of 44% in our warden force. We simply cannot compete in terms of salary with other similar state and federal agencies. Thus, in our written testimony, we have asked this committee to provide additional funding. And just remember that our funding comes primarily through RPI funding for our enforcement division. We do that in order, so we ask that so that we can provide wage raises for our enforcement officers to a level commensurate with their counterparts. We truly understand that this is an issue that many non-tribal agencies face as well. However, this is an unmet treaty obligation, and as such should be prioritized. The 5 commissions funded under RPI have estimated their current combined need for RPI funding to be approximately $66 million. Even if that full amount is not currently possible, we will place a priority on full employment in our conservation enforcement division. We also like to prioritize cost of living adjustments and competitive salaries for all of our staff, should additional funds be available. We very much appreciate this committee's recommendation last year for an $800,000 increase to RPI, but we're equally disappointed that the increase was not included in the final appropriation. And so in closing, we hope that you will try once again.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. I'm going to turn to Ms. Pingree first.
Did I miss somebody? Sorry.
He started.
Got it. I was out of the room. I apologize for that. Well, thank you all very much. Really appreciate what you had to say. As I mentioned to the earlier panel, I'm originally from Minnesota, so and I had a chance to visit the Mille Lacs tribe this year, and so always appreciate what you the challenges that you're facing in that state. And thank you so much for drawing some of the bigger picture connections there. I won't use the word invisible either, but I think it's a really important point to make with all of us all the time about some of the things that Chief Francis had mentioned earlier. Why aren't we stepping back and looking at the big picture, not asking you to come every year and saying, could you give us another $100,000 or $15 here or there? These are really big issues that we're not facing right now at the level of the lack of funding. So thank you for talking about the sort of deep challenges that that provides. And I was particularly concerned to hear what you mentioned about the youth camp funding, which, you know, again, it's only a microcosm of the challenges, but that's such an important thing to be able to allow young people to have that connection to whether it's foraging or just understanding sort of their natural surroundings. And it would be really tragic not to have those vacancies filled, so you could make sure that the opportunities were there. But thank you all. Really important testimony, and we appreciate you all very much.
Ms. McCollum?
So this is kind of in our office, I use it, my hometown team mast up here. So not as large as some of the others, but in my eyes, the mightiest. Chairman Johnson, he brings up a real important point, and unless you are on the Prairie Island Reservation and you see the kids' playground and you know when they're up in the swings that they're looking at cast upon cast of nuclear storage in the Mississippi floodplain with railroad tracks not too far from it. I was there. I voted against the storage. And my fear was when not only we were being disrespectful to the tribes, but that it would be permanently stored there. And it was NSP at the time, a different company owned it, and they weren't going to, do 12 casts. Oddly enough, the day after the law was passed, they had 12 concrete platforms, and they've used them. And then they re-racked when they told us and they told you that they couldn't re-rack. So it is really something to behold. And I know people get upset with me sometimes from certain states, but I will vote for Yucca Mountain every chance I get. But I fear, because the state of Minnesota took an affirmative vote to store the nuclear waste, even if that were to open, we're at the bottom of the list. Thank you for reminding us that nuclear waste has an impact on communities, and your community was not consulted. And for that, I didn't prevail, but I was glad to be part of the fight along the side with you. I want to pick on what you two gentlemen said about Tawahe, and we've been working on it. It started out as pilots. It's successful in that. So anything we need to do with the authorizing committee, I think we should look at it and make sure we get things in place to move forward with it. The president's recognized it now, and it's a game changer in communities. You still need the other resources, as you both pointed out, but it has been a game changer. We just had a vote on the floor last week, and it had to do with the boundary waters and the proposed mining to go up there. All these mines have failed, but would you maybe explain, and I'll have Fond du Lac do that, because you're the most impacted directly. All the tribes have been supportive, including Sioux Nation tribes. Could you explain what happens when the sulfite gets in the water? Because they say how, the mine's not in the boundary waters, but it's like a sponge up there. All these mines have failed. What happens? What happens?
Has everybody heard of the Laurentian Divide?
I'm a geography teacher, so
Okay.
water flows north.
So that means the water flows north. So north of the mine area is the boundary waters. So anything at that point in time, we look at as where Fond du Lac is treated as a downstream state for anything flowing into the St. Louis River and then flowing into Lake Superior. But the misconception is that the Laurentian Divide at that point in time absorbs water and moves north. So it flows north into the boundary waters itself. So opening up a mining principle into Superior National Forest for that principle will find its way into the boundary waters. So when you take a look at the law for the protection of this place and then restoring it to what it is and maintaining it in perpetuity at the boundary waters, that won't happen. Sulfate, it kills wild rice. It kills things into the water. Principles of mining, reverse osmosis, you can't put purity, that pure water back into a system, because when it doesn't have the minerals and doesn't have principles like that, it also kills the ecosystem. So when we take a look at where it exactly is and what they're going to do with it, it will go into the boundary waters. The water will make its way into the boundary waters. There is no safe mining that exists. There's responsible mining that can happen, but there's also irresponsible mining that continues to happen. So if we think of that, it's like anything. You take it, what is the residual of this toxin? Well, there's all kinds of residuals from every toxin that exists, and them are the things that have to be monitored under that principle. To my friend's comment there is, it's basically this. There isn't any mining that can happen that will not affect an ecosystem in a negative way. I think that's the simplicity of the way to put it. But there are responsible ways of mining, and nobody has come up with the responsible ways of mining. I shouldn't say that, I apologize. They have come up with the responsible ways for mining. The other thing, too, is the one biggest piece that needs to be looked at is that consultation piece with tribes. Listen to ecological knowledge that's been here for 4 ice ages. And that's where it needs to come. That consultation needs to happen. Them conversation with tribes need to happen to understand what the ecosystem is and how the ecosystem has survived for 4 ice ages under this principle.
Thank you. And as was pointed out, military service, you mentioned how tribes are often viewed as invisible. I serve on the Defense Appropriations Committee. I knew before I was on the committee, but now that I'm on the committee, I understand it more. The percentage of Native Americans who serve our nation compared to any other population is off the charts. And you can't go to one powwow where veterans aren't recognized. So thank all of your veterans for their service. McGwitch, I yield back.
Thank you all for being here. Let me just say that I appreciate your testimony, and I've been rereading a book that I read when I was first chairman of this committee. It's called The Rights of Indians and Tribes. And I just read last week the section on it on law enforcement, and you brought up that issue. It is I don't know how you do any law enforcement on reservations with the different laws that exist. If you're a Native American and you commit a crime on trust land against another Native American, it's one thing. If it's against a non-Native American, it's another thing. If it's on non-trust land but on the reservation, it's treated differently and stuff. I don't know how you ever find out who the hell's in charge of any of this. And we need to simplify this. I'm one of those who believe that tribes have the right to police their own reservations and enforce the law against whoever breaks the law. So I'd like to, at some point in time, get into how we change these laws. And it's due to different Supreme Court decisions along the way and all sorts of crazy stuff. But I'm more confused after I read it than I was before I read it. Go ahead, Darryl.
Okay, I want to make a comment on that. Like non-members violate our tribal laws, bring drugs in. They violate abuse our women and children and grandparents. What we do is they keep doing it, and then we banish them. But then they still come back in. So 3 years ago, this one individual got caught 5 times violating the banishment. So we incarcerated him. They kept us as a chairman of the tribe. This person was abusing his woman and the kids, and plus the grandma. and I kept him in jail. The BIA, they were going to take our funds away. They also were going to charge me for obstruction of justice. And so, without me still against to let him go, they released him to the county. The county kept him only 2-3 days and let him go. And then sure enough, he got arrested on the outside the reservation. But this is what the problem we have.
Yeah.
Now they're using our tribal members. The drug dealers are using our tribal members to bring the drugs in. It's a continued fight.
Yep.
And we're doing our best to stop it. But we got to be allowed to incarcerate these non-members and detain them and charge them. But we're not allowed because of the 1978 Oliphant Law.
Yeah,
That's got to be changed for tribes. It's just not Red Lake. It happens all over.
that's right.
All over Indian land.
That's right.
I ask you guys do the right thing. Miigwech.
I've always found it strange that you can only incarcerate for a year at the most. And so a lot of times, if there's a drug dealer and stuff, you know, you want it prosecuted by the county or by the state or whatever. It's just a bizarre set of laws. And somehow I think we need to look at that whole situation and how we can improve that. But that takes an authorizing bill, and I think the Natural Resources Committee that oversees this ought to be looking at how can we reform these laws to have them make sense, because you guys care more about what happens on your reservations than anybody else does. And drug dealers are using them because they know of the challenges if they're not on the reservation, you know? Yeah. So anyway, thank you all for being here today. We appreciate your testimony. Look forward to working with you on these.
is in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We administer 23 governmental divisions and manage over 75 federal, state, local, and tribally funded programs across our 7-county service area. We have a tribal membership of approximately 50,000. Our territory includes 2,800 acres of trust land. We also utilize territories throughout Michigan to exercise our treaty rights to hunt, fish, and gather. For almost 50 years, the Sioux Tribe of Chippewa Indians has built its government capacity to provide the full range of services to its members, including healthcare, education, elder services, law enforcement, housing, social services, and cultural programs. We operate 8 health clinics across our 7-county service area. In these clinics, we offer a wide range of services, including medical, dental, behavioral health, special diabetes, nutrition, pharmacy, wellness programs, and traditional medicine. We are proud of the work that we do in this space. The Sioux Tribe of Chippewa Indians at this time would like to express its deep appreciation for the Congress's action in providing advanced appropriations for fiscal year 2025 for the Indian Health Service. Given the very uncertain fiscal times facing our nation, we appreciate the knowledge knowing that this base budget of our Indian health system is secure. This allows our program and staff to plan accordingly on how to best meet the healthcare needs of our people. Regarding healthcare, one of the greatest threats to the future of tribal communities is substance abuse and mental health conditions. And this is important to me because prior to being elected chairman of my tribe, I was a mental health therapist who worked in this area. Since the heroin/opioid public health emergency of 2018, illicit drug use and mental health illnesses have only escalated to a national emergency, particularly in Indian country. With healthcare staff shortages, long waiting lists, and patients in crisis, the need for mental health and addiction treatment services is absolutely overwhelming. It is clear that funding and staff shortages continue to be primary barriers to services. According to the 2021 National Survey on Drug Use and Health, nearly half of young adults aged 18 to 25 in 2021 had either any mental health illness, AMI, or a substance use disorder, SUD, in the past year. American Indian or Alaskan Natives were 11.4% higher than all other nationalities at 34.2% to have either an AMI or an SUD in that same period. As these rates continue to climb, the access to necessary hospital treatments to combat the mental and opioid epidemics continue to be non-existent. Key programs offered by IHS, SAMHSA, DOI, and partnering agencies provide limited respite to exhausted communities and health staff. While the Department of Interior, Department of Health and Human Services, and the Department of Justice have been tasked with coordinating certain existing department programs pursuant to the Tribal Law and Order Act, funding to expand and implement successful prevention, treatment, and aftercare programming is stagnant. The current interagency agreement calls for the development of tribal action plans. However, funding is limited to SAMHSA's available competitive funding instruments, leaving out necessary full funding of tribal action plans that have already been adopted by tribes. Notwithstanding the lack of funding for the tribal action plans, the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians was one of the first tribes in the nation to have completed a tribal action plan to combat substance abuse on our reservations. Tribes now need the resources to implement their plans. We would call on the committee to provide additional funding to both the BIA and IHS to fund the implementation of tribal action plans. It is also time to fully fund Indian Health Services. Miigwech, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Austin. George?
Morning. George Thompson, Vice President of the Lac du Flambeau Tribal Council. On behalf of the Lac du Flambeau Tribal President, John Johnson, I thank you for inviting us to testify today concerning the FY25 budget needs. Unfortunately, President Johnson could not make it due to the recent passing of his wife, Manidu Wigon, also known as Sue Johnson. She was known as Auntie Sue, Grandma Sue to many youth, and was very passionate about integrating tribal culture and education. Our Ojibwe ancestors entered into the treaties of 1836, 1837, 1842, and 1854 that ceded certain lands while reserving the right to hunt and fish and gather in ceded territories. The federal government must honor these treaties that are now a part of the United States' trust responsibility to Indian peoples. I am joined today by our Chief of Police, Thomas Bills, State of Emergency Data Analyst, Stacy Stone, and Administrator D. Allen. The unified theme of my testimony is the epidemic that continues to devastate our community like all other tribal nations you've heard this morning. Drug addiction, including but not limited to meth, fentanyl, and heroin, harms our members. It diminishes our housing stock, increases the mental health crisis, and spurs human trafficking on our reservation. To combat crime and addiction, the tribal government subsidizes federal programs with millions of dollars that the BIA, IHS, and EPA accounts should cover as a part of the federal trust responsibility. About 40% of our annual arrests by tribal police involve drugs. We ask the subcommittee to respond to this crisis with significant funding increases to address this emergency. I turn to our request. Within Vilas County, our tribe has 11 officers compared to the Sheriff's Department's 39 officers. Both respond to an equal amount of calls, which average around 6,000 per year. This takes a toll on our tribal police officers who work 12-hour shifts. They are stretched too thin. Please increase BIA law enforcement accounts in the FY25 budget and pass HR 4524. Our tribal social programs need additional BIA funds to address the consequences of substance use disorders. This includes domestic abuse and child neglect. Please increase BIA Health or BIA Human Services accounts and expand the successful Twahi initiative to all tribes and have more resources to address these challenges. Please increase the IHS accounts for mental health counseling and drug treatment, such as medication-assisted treatment programs that require trained health professionals, counselors, and local access to culturally appropriate treatment and aftercare centers to succeed. Finally, we see the gaps in the statutory authority that appears to prohibit the use of federal funds in EPA, IHS, and BIA accounts to clean meth and fentanyl-contaminated homes. EPA funds can clean meth-contaminated labs, but not meth-contaminated homes. IHS personnel can and do provide technical assistance to the tribes to develop standards to clean homes, but IHS has no funds to award the tribes to clean a contaminated tribal home or rental unit. It costs the tribe at least $4,000 to $8,000 to clean and test a meth-contaminated home. We are losing our housing inventory due to drugs. This is causing overcrowding and domestic and child abuse. Please provide clear statutory authority and appropriations for IHS, EPA, and BIA to permit the use of federal appropriations to clean tribal homes from drug contamination and direct IHS and EPA to assist tribes to develop a uniform standard to mitigate illicit drug contamination of tribal homes. Thank you. Butch.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both very much for your testimony and certainly for covering the substance use disorder challenges that we are all facing, particularly in rural states like mine, but also at a high level. And everything you talked about, fully funding IHS, funding the tribal action plans that you're talking about seems just critically important. So thank you for addressing that and raising our attention to that. So I hope we can make a difference on that. And the point you made about decontaminating a home is an interesting point and maybe something we can figure out, since in the scale of things, you're not talking about an enormous pot of funding, but you're talking about something that's critically important and very expensive for the tribes to have to deal with themselves. And I think we all know how devastating it is to lose housing stock, because that compounds all the other problems that we're talking about. So thanks for bringing that to our attention. But really, overall, the law enforcement part, the supporting the funding on mental health and substance use disorder. Thank you for bringing our attention to that. I yield back.
Ms. McCullough?
Wow, pointing out that there's no funding for cleaning the houses. I know when we were dealing with meth, even in the municipalities I represented, dangerous for police officers to go in. The cleanup was very complicated, very complicated. And then you've got all the hazardous material after you're done doing the clean, and then sometimes flooring and everything has to come out. So the $4,000 to $5,000 is probably maybe even the low range for doing that. So would the housing be eligible to be cleaned if there was more money? I want to make sure I understand that right, because I know there were different pots of money even for municipalities in like North St. Paul and St. Paul and this what the state of Minnesota had to draw on. Could you help me understand that a little better? And it might not be in this committee, it might be in judiciary or something like that, but I'd like to take a look. Could you help navigate that?
You asked if housing could receive funds or
Yeah,
does
you
receive
said for
funds?
the clean, so there's money that you get for doing some of the hazmat, and the police departments usually get equipment and that for going in. But for cleaning up the housing, is it a lack of funding available to clean up the housing, or is it that the money would not even be eligible for cleaning the houses? We can look into that too.
It's a little bit of column A and column B on that.
Okay.
They sometimes have to subsidize funding through housing in order to clean these units, just because of the same EPA regulations. Of course, tribes have the EPA regulations we use because it's the higher standard.
Right.
So part of the problem is, having the funds, access to test kits, cleaning the houses, retesting the houses to make sure they're at safe levels. This is a very lengthy process, and depending on the amount of drugs that were used inside of the home, you know, you could go through multiple cleanings. So you take that number and sometimes multiply it by 2 or 3. We were at a point with the amount of drug use, it damn near bankrupted our housing authority. And it still continues to hurt our housing authority, but at the same time, you also have a lot of homes that were owned by individual tribal members with no housing attached to it. That's where a portion of that funding comes into play for us as well, to clean these homes up so they're available stock for someone to purchase and have their own home. Could that be the responsibility of? Yes, but you know, being as remote as we are in the North Woods, access to that type of cleaning service
Yeah.
or materials is very hard to come by.
Okay, well, it might not be the funding that's in this committee. It might be something we need to, as appropriators, talk to some of our fellow appropriators and others committees, because losing housing stock is you know, a crisis on these tribal lands. And housing goes to a lot of the mental health and substance control issues that you were talking about. Would you just take a second and talk about how housing plays into that? There's a whole lot of things, and your testimony is wonderful, but just
Yeah.
staying on the theme of housing.
Yeah, so regarding the theme of housing, I believe that tribal families are more likely to use substances if they don't have certain opportunities available to them, and that includes housing, education, and employment. So if people have a stable place to live and they have a good life, they're less likely to use, plain and simple.
And as you mentioned, really quick, if I can respond to that, I do understand that that is another committee, but we are asking for some help in addressing this committee as well, and we do appreciate that if you can reach out to it. You know, as I mentioned before, it's not just housing, it's also on the tribal end too, and we have subsidized close to $200,000 this year to try and combat that. That only leaves us a small window of opportunity to get so many houses cleaned and ready. And it goes back to what Austin was saying as well. Without that lack of housing, you know, it just keeps creating that downward spiral for people, and just it pushes the drugs harder on our reservations as well.
Well, Chief Francis is making an excellent point earlier about, and Ms. Pingree and the chair have talked about this too, about how we have control over a limited amount of funding in this appropriations committee. Then there's the authorizing committee to do some of the work that Chairman Simpson was talking about in law enforcement. But the challenge that we have in this committee too is we don't have a unified budget to look at if we want to plus something up to say, to go to our colleagues in another committee and saying, hey, we can be real impactful if we do that, because we don't see that either. So, you know, we pay attention to it, but we're kind of in the same canoe as you all are when it comes to being impactful, because we touch other committees as well. So I think the testimony today about getting a unified budget would be very helpful for us and in allocating our dollars more effectively too.
And we as tribes are more than willing to come to the table and advocate as well. We spent the last day or so, and we're going to spend the next day or two speaking to IHS and other committee or other departments, requesting some additional funding for this help. We aren't just looking at this as, well, it's one and done. You know, we've created so many things within our reservation alone to think outside the box to try and get people help, try and restock the housing. We are very forward thinking, so it's not just like the money's there and it just goes to something and that's it. You know, I give our administration, our chief of police, and our state of emergency data analyst a lot of credit over some of the outreach programs that we've created in the past 2 years, trying to help a person that comes in and says, I have a problem with addiction. Find those resources within that right amount of time so that it doesn't cause that person to just say, well, I ain't getting nothing, so this is how my life is going to be. we try very hard, and we are willing to speak to whomever to try and get assistance, not just for Lac du Flambeau, but for other tribes. And I believe you heard it in the previous testimonies, and you'll probably hear it more today. That's an issue plaguing us, and now we have trafficking that is starting to pick up on our little reservation, and it's horrible. You know, these people are taking advantages of young women, and it's very sad to see it come down to that. So thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I agree with you on fentanyl, but also, you know, my understanding is on building costs. As building costs, when you're looking at materials that can be cleaned, sometimes it's 200 or 300 times more the elevated cost.
Oh, yeah.
So just the building, and then in the case of the Blackfeet is the infrastructure. So you need the infrastructure in order to do it. But talking about enforcement, when I was secretary, we put together a drug task force. And it was multi-agency. It was, because as you point out, jurisdiction's an issue. You have BIA, you have county, and you have the sovereignty of the nation. So the task force, in coordination with the nations, we had FBI, DIA, and Interior has a lot of law enforcement. And we didn't knock everything out, but we were successful at least giving the message that, look, you know what, on Indian territories, drugs aren't free anymore. Would you agree that a task force of that type with multi-agency in coordination with the tribes would at least be helpful in addressing some of the problems we have between missing and killed and murdered indigenous women as well as the tribes?
Yes, I would agree that increased support to these task force would definitely be a help. We do have good working relationships with state DCI, NAJI, and other task force that are just slipping my mind at the moment. I'm sorry, but they work great together, and they've combated our drug issues as soon as they come in to our reservation. You know, I can't speak enough about how grateful I am for the law enforcement that we have in our community right now. They went from your standard patrol people to drug enforcement agencies. But, you know, as you mentioned, these task force that you talk about, sometimes their hands get really tied. And, you know, we're starting to see more interaction between cartels targeting tribes and bringing this stuff directly to the reservation. That's where that flow up and beyond our reach, you know, can definitely use some reinforcement. I think our tribal police can offer a lot of information.
Mr. Chairman, do you share the same?
I share that sentiment, I do, yes.
I appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thanks.
Thank you, and thank you both for being here today. Interesting testimony. Something that we will certainly look into consideration of when we're trying to put together a budget for this. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Panel number 4. Mr. Fox, Ms. Buckles, and Miss Langford.
How are you? Good to see you.
Henry, you are first from the White Earth Nation.
Buzu, Gage, give me one, Indijna Ka, Makwa Nudame, Gaji Ka Juegamug. Good morning, Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Henry Fox. I am the Vice Chairman of the Reservation Business Council of the White Earth Band of Ojibwe. Established by the Treaty of 1867, the White Earth Reservation is a 36-mile by 36-mile square in northern Minnesota. I am grateful for the opportunity to share with you today some of our physical priorities and needs at White Earth and in Indian country. Lagging federal investment in infrastructure on tribal lands over the last several decades has created serious need within our communities. My testimony today will focus on roads, tribal management, acquisition of the Tamarack National Wildlife Refuge, and IHS funding. First, I will address the reservation roads program by highlighting funding levels as well as BIA policy. Despite having a very large rural land base with many reservation roads and isolated communities, the White Earth Nation does not receive anywhere near the necessary funding to build or maintain roads for their citizens. This jeopardizes public health and safety. We understand that federal funding is limited, but we believe the BIA policies on distributing existing monies also plays a key role in these budget shortfalls. Transportation facilities located on Indian reservations and within tribal communities are maintained largely by the tribe. Funds for road maintenance programs are administered at the BIA region offices for roads identified as part of the BIA road system. As public roads, BIA roads and bridges are often major corridors that provide critical access for tribal communities through which medical, education, commercial, and recreational services and opportunities are delivered or made available to tribal members and the general public. The White Earth Reservation has a large land base, and the band finds it increasingly difficult to maintain the curtain roads, bridges, in the inventory to acceptable standards. While the band once received about $5 million plus in annual allocation, the amount the band now receives has decreased to approximately $1.5 million. This is a 70% reduction in funding, yet there is no reduction in the band's responsibility or cost. Without adequate funding, the band must make difficult decisions to choose which projects to fund over others. These decisions are often no-win choices that all have unavoidable risks associated with them. Recent increases in construction costs and equipment repair have made this progressively more difficult. The BIA maintenance formula provides only pennies to a dollar compared with our local counterparts for cost per mile to maintain. We simply cannot continue to upgrade and maintain our roads under the current system. The allocation system must be fair to all. Based on the band's long-range transportation plan to meet future residential expansion and economic growth, we require a total of $30 million for road repairs and upgrades. These repairs and upgrades will assist the band in meeting the goals within our transportation plan. They will also provide safer transportation on the many roads which band members use to travel to their homes and between communities. Currently, many of these are gravel or dirt roads, and investment in maintaining and improving them will help make our roads safer and more well-suited to our northern climate. My second topic is the Tamarack National Wildlife Refuge. The Tamarack National Wildlife Refuge was created within White Earth Reservation by the Collier Agreement in 1935. This was an agreement between the Biological Service, now the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Unfortunately, the terms of the Collier Agreement have not been fulfilled to the satisfaction of the White Earth Band. The federal government has failed to meet its obligation with respect to protecting the interests of the band in many ways, including hunting, fishing, gathering, and allotments in the refuge area. Additionally, some of the lands used to create the Tamarack were taken from tribal allottees who were deprived of their land at below market value under methods that were deceptive, underhanded, and would not be allowed today. The White Earth Band of Ojibwe is now seeking to manage these lands. Once again, we believe the first step to this should be a co-stewardship and co-management agreement between the band and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We believe that the White Earth Band of Ojibwe can better administer these lands more effectively and at a lower cost to the taxpayer than the current approach. Many areas of the Tamarack contain important cultural and historical heritage areas and patrimony, all of which the White Earth Band would be most qualified to manage and preserve. Last year, White Earth sent a letter to Secretary Deb Holland requesting the DOI entering into co-management agreement with the U.S. with us. And we have been having productive discussion with the DOI. We have also worked to keep the Minnesota congressional delegation briefed on progress. Today, we respectfully request that funding be included in FY25 Interior Appropriations to help fund a 638 self-determination, executive, and imminent co-management agreement for the Tamarack. While funding for 638 contracts is mandatory for BIA programs, 638 contract with other agencies are discretionary and are heavily impacted by the availability or lack thereof of appropriated funds.
We're gonna have to ask you to speed quickly.
Okay.
Very quickly.
I'll move on from that then right away. My third topic is highlight the urgent need for increased financial support for the White Earth Tribal Police Department to address its acute recruitment and retention challenges. Despite its unwavering commitment to safeguarding the White Earth Reservation community, our police department has faced significant obstacles due to limited resources. The struggles we have with recruiting retentions are primarily rooted in our inability to offer competitive salaries and benefits compared to other law enforcement agencies. So they had to make cuts in some positions just to, you know, get what we got today for our tribal police. And so then I'll just go, I urge the subcommittee to allocate additional financial resources to the BIA to support the recruiting and retention efforts of the tribal police departments nationwide. Thank you for your opportunity to testify today, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Welcome.
Okay. Good morning.
Pull the mic over if you would.
Mr. Fox, turn your mic on.
Okay. Hi, good morning. It's good morning in my language. I'm Dana Buckles, Councilman of the Assiniboine Sioux Tribes of the Fort Peck Reservation. I want to thank the subcommittee to commit full funding for IHS, BIA, and EPA. I've spent decades in public service and most of my career in our tribal health system working to improve health outcomes for our tribal members. So today I want to spend most of my time addressing healthcare needs. First and foremost, we are facing a significant mental health and addiction crisis. While these challenges are not entirely new, there are elements of the situation today that require significant additional resources and creative applications of resources. We're dealing with the widespread use of the accessibility of opioids, specifically fentanyl. The potency and lethal of the fentanyl are unlike anything before. This drug is impacting all our demographics in our community. The impact of the crisis is magnified by long-standing inequities in terms of health care and basic infrastructure of Indian country. Fort Peck's health system is operated on an utterly inadequate budget for decades. We're also very rural, which adds additional layers of complications to attracting and retaining healthcare professionals. It's critical now, as the need is heightened, that Congress commit funds to the IHS commensurate with documented needs. On our reservation, we only have a single drug treatment facility, which is Spottable, which, because of its current resources, only provide outpatient treatment. The demand for our outpatient treatment exceeds what we can provide, but even more notably, we have a dire need for inpatient treatment services and none to provide at this time. We're experiencing an unrelating wave of overdoses and many resulting in death. These tragedies always have widespread impacts of our entire families. It's simply unacceptable. We cannot continue to lose people when the crisis is preventable and treatable if the resources are made available. I ask Congress to please commit additional resources to the tribal mental health and substance misuses programming. Finally, there's a significant need for funding for our dialysis treatment. At Fort Peck, we operate a dialysis unit in high demand and does not receive any federal funding. Despite clear statutory authority and the IHCIA and the demonstrated need for greater funding for dialysis treatment, including the need for additional staff, equipment, greater access to organ transplant and facilities located locally in Indian country. Far too many Native Americans are losing their lives to diabetes. The Fort Peck tribes subsidized our tribal health dialysis program carried out under a 638 contract in the tune of $300,000 to $500,000 annually. We urge this subcommittee to appropriate funds to the IHS service account to fund direct and tribally delivered dialysis treatment to address this emerging situation. I thank you for the commitment to improving the quality of life of Indian country. The Fort Peck tribes look forward to continue to serve our citizens with greater federal resources. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Carol?
Hesquex Pesia, Kesuk Witnam. Chairman Simpson, members of the committee. Good morning. My name is Carol Langford, and I am a member of the Tribal Council of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes of the Flathead Reservation. Thank you for this opportunity to share our thoughts in addressing challenges facing our community and the subcommittee's commitment to improve the lives of our shared constituents. In our view, the first step is to double down on the efforts to address mental illness and substance abuse. Our tribes are made up of approximately 8,000 enrolled tribal members. Approximately 5,000 enrolled tribal members live on the reservation, which has a total population of approximately 30,000 people. Unfortunately, nearly every member of our community has felt the impacts of mental illness and addiction. As fentanyl and other opioids plague our community, we must support our law enforcement, health professionals, and social service programs. As an original self-governance tribe, we have carried out all functions of IHS and BIA for decades. Our local control and wise fiscal management of these programs have allowed us to dramatically improve the quality of services to our community. However, despite the efficiencies, we are limited by available resources. Full funding for Indian Health Service and additional funding for the Bureau of Indian Affairs is therefore a critical component to our ability to adequately address the crisis we face surrounding mental health and addiction. For the past several years, I have served as a member of the Lake County Drug Court, where I witnessed firsthand how appropriate support can help people lift themselves out of the darkness of untreated mental illness and addiction. At CSKT, we are administering several cutting-edge programs to address these challenges. For example, includes the development of a drug treatment court as a diversion to criminal charges pending in our tribal court, a reentry program that assists individuals returning to their communities after encounters with the criminal justice system, and streamlining the delivery of services through our participation in the Tawahi Initiative. The Tawahi was established to improve the health and well-being of tribal communities by reducing poverty, substance abuse, domestic violence, and associated outcomes such as youth suicide. Since joining Tawahi, we have made significant strides in the developing steps leading to the coordinated system of change resulting in positive outcomes for our children and families. We have identified the need to create a coordinated service delivery system to break through silos. We have also implemented a cross-disciplinary team to manage case involving children in need of care and services. We are now working to incorporate tribal language and cultural perspectives into our programming, reviewing our codes and policies to address these challenges, and to begin subsequent phase through action and strategic planning. We are grateful for the subcommittee's support of the Tawahi Initiative and excited to see the positive outcomes that increases Tawahi funding will have on our people. Of course, we cannot overlook the importance of brave men and women in law enforcement that keeps our communities safe. Our law enforcement officers serve as the first line of defense in slowing the imports of opioids and other illegal drugs to our reservation. We must ensure that these officers have the resources they need to protect our people. Like many of our neighbors, we are experiencing unprecedented drought conditions that have persisted from year to year. These extreme conditions present threats to our land, water, and our natural resources from fire and other natural disasters. Our Flathead Reservation was reserved as a permanent homeland under the Hellgate Treaty of 1855 and encompasses over 1.2 million acres of timber, range, and farmland in western Montana, and is situated around the south half of Flathead Lake, the largest freshwater lake west of the Great Lakes. Unfortunately, our reservation has been ravaged by fire during the past 3 fire seasons, but without the subcommittee's support, outcomes could have been worse. We were pleased to have the Congressional Appropriations staff who were able to witness firsthand the work of the CSKT Division of Fire and a full host of fire management activities it provides. We look forward to continuing work with the subcommittee to address adequate infrastructure to support the evolving fire landscape and to ensure parity for our tribal wildland firefighters. Currently, criteria limits firefighter workforce retention funding to only wildfire staff paid by preparedness and fuels funding. This approach limits workforce retention and has created tension in our organization. Our wildland fire militia, who are vital to the wildfire program during critical periods every summer, are not eligible for the retention. While we have work to do, we are extremely grateful for the subcommittee in addressing the wildfire as we adapt to changing snowfall patterns and drought conditions and continue to improve fire management. Thank you for this opportunity to testify, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Carol. Ms. Finger?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for your testimony. You really covered so much from the critical issues related to substance use disorder to firefighting, which I can see is a huge problem where you are located. So thank you for that. Gave us a lot to think about in writing the budget. And I do appreciate your mention of the drug courts. Everywhere I've seen those, they just make such a huge difference. And if we had sufficient funding for all tribes to have access to that, I think it would make a big difference in this challenging issue. And thank you as well, Mr. Fox. The description of how much money you actually receive for roads and then what you really need is sort of staggering the gap there. I represent Maine. We have a lot of rural roads and had some horrible weather this winter, and I know how quickly gravel roads can wash out, and then people lose their access to get to work, to do the work they have to do. And so these are vital lifelines for people. We really have to think about getting more funding there. So thank you all. I yield back.
Mr. Zinke?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Fox, I noticed you're supporting a U.S. Army tattoo. Thank you for your service, sir. Councilmember Buckles, and thank you. And I do honor holding the title of a Wonga Intacha. That is my given name, this Assiniboine, and always nice to have you, Councilmember Langford. I want to drill down a little on health care, on fentanyl. So, and you deal with the IHS. We had the IHS commissioner here, director, and she understands, I believe, the plight of the reservation. So, you're looking at fentanyl. Can you give an estimate of how much resources that our health services at Fort Peck are dedicated to either drug abuse or related health care issues because of drugs, either into mental health? Because I hear it's staggering.
Yes, we only have a few, couple tribal programs and mainly IHS, and we're really lacking that. That's why we need funding for that. That fentanyl is pretty potent out there. It's just not the person. When you really look at it, it's basically families too. But there's only a few of our programs that help, and it touches, I think, part of it, but it doesn't do a whole complete overall like wraparound services for that need.
Will you consider it a significant problem at Fort Peck?
Right. Yes. I earlier heard drug cartels. We were told through. You talked about. I hear drug task forces too. The Mexican cartels are really bad, and we hear that they're not just on our reservation or on all reservations, because it's a lot easier to penetrate and utilize going through reservations. And it's like they pump this fentanyl and everything on these reservations and get all our tribal members hooked on it.
And I've asked other chairmen, because when I was secretary, we did put together a multi-agency task force, FBI, DIA, in coordination with the tribes, always, because I respect the sovereignty of the nations. But I thought it was effective, and in this budget, it was pulled. And we're looking at ways to reestablish that. But it would obviously it would have to be tribally, I would say, pushed. So I give that. And Carol, for you, thank you for your service, long-time service. I do support the FERC variance. But I also support, upstream. So I think the Hungry Horse Dam can be well managed or better managed. So we run ahead of this problem, because as 3 generations of plumbers, you have fill and you have drain up there on the reservation, and both sides, fill and drain, will make the solution on it. And just wrap around, I do strongly support the finalization of the last 3 compacts, the Belknap and Indian Nation, and we're going to the chairman. I think Indian Nations should be feeling pretty good because we have a wonderful chair. I think Chairman Cole is outstanding. We have Chairman Simpson and that I think we all, and ranking member and members all understand that we've been lacking in our duties, especially on our commitments on treaties. So I think we all get that. So on the problems with Salish on health care, let me ask you the same question. Do you think a task force would be helpful in combating that? And last time the task force it was drug task force, but drugs and human trafficking are related. So it really was both looking at indigenous women and the plight of that, but also, would you find value in a task force, multiple agency, to try to unwind some of the jurisdictional issues?
Yes, absolutely. When we had the Northwest Drug Task Force, it was overwhelmingly positive, and it protected a lot of the drugs coming in. So absolutely, I think that was a big hurt to a lot of us when that went away. And I don't know, maybe it still exists on a different level, but certainly I know our tribal police in Lake County, they struggle with, the coordination and all of that, but the task force did do that. And we had a lot of positive messages. And I think it uses about 65% of our Indian health, tribal health budget. And that is, that's a guess, but it's affected everything that we do. And that's why my testimony said, hands down, we're fighting this. And we need to do whatever we can. And thank you for mentioning the drug courts, because it's very important that every tribe has an opportunity to do something besides throwing people in jail and throwing the key away. It doesn't work. But this, I found, does work, and so I thank you for asking that question. But yes, the task force is just another part that will help all of us, and I'm saddened that it's not there anymore, so thank you.
Appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Well, thank you, and thank you for mentioning Tawahi. We had a bit of a discussion about that earlier. Tawahi, drug courts, everything, it's all about wraparound services. You just can't. We're whole individuals, and everything touches the individual. It touches their family, and it's a great way to really get a community also then involved, so that we're supporting each other, right? So thank you for mentioning that. Vice Chairman Fox, we've had some successes in Minnesota, in large part to our Lieutenant Governor, who's a proud member of White Earth. I would like maybe for the committee just to talk about a couple of the things that we're trying to get to work, and how you see the federal government playing a better role. The state of Minnesota has been returning land back to tribal nations. The state of Minnesota has been trying not to take any kind of cut for administration as funds come through. I think the biggest success was COVID. And I'm very excited about the conversations that you're having with Fish and Wildlife about co-management leading possibly to full management, or maybe everybody decides co-management works well. So you talk about some of the things that the state's doing, because we have 87 counties in Minnesota. It's crazy, but the law was that you could ride to the county on a horseback and get home that night. So we have 87, even though nobody rides a horse to fill out their paperwork anymore. So you've got the counties, you've got the cities, you've got the municipalities. And White Earth has kind of been very fortunate sometimes, especially when it comes to some drug issues, working with the FBI and that. But that's in part because the counties you work with. So could you maybe talk about how state and county cooperation is important? Because I don't know how we mandate that, but maybe we can do that by sweetening the pot for those counties who do law enforcement and that for working with your law enforcement.
Well, kind of on the road situation, I know working with the county, because in my district over there, which is District 1, and our casino goes through, the reservation, County Road 7, to get to our Bagley site. Well, every year, trying to work with the county of saying, are you going to at least put a little bit of gravel on that road? Where our BIA roads is willing, to do it and not even get nothing for it. They're so good up there with their snow plows and everything that I don't know why they don't, make that connection of they probably get money for doing it, which we wouldn't even want, so they could still get the money. I wouldn't care, but I'm sure somebody else would. But I'm a big man too of chemical dependency. That was my background. Actually, this Easter I celebrated 25 years of sobriety. So they say I'm a big impact on a res, but I don't feel it. So I just try to help as I can. So kind of, like with the roads, we did have a county trail coming through, which is gravel. Well, the tribe got to tar half of it but the county wouldn't let them tar the other half of it, so it's kind of like that, you know, like maybe they bump heads a little bit, or I can do it better than you, or, so I guess that's where that's at, so.
That's hard. We're making inroads, but in Minnesota, but there's a long way to go.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Ozzie? Thank you all for being here today. We appreciate your testimony. Thank you. Certainly take it into consideration as we try to put together a 25 fiscal budget year.
Good luck.
Thank you. Panel 5. Joseph Rosette, Ashley Weeks, Marvin Weatherwax, and George J. Ball.
Bringing in the Marines. Semper Fi. Blackfeet Warriors.
Thank you all for being here today. Joseph, you're up first.
Tansi. Thank you, Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, and members of the Subcommittee for the opportunity to share our fiscal year 25 funding priorities. My name is Joseph Rosette Jr., and I serve as a Business Committee member of the Chippewa Cree Tribe of Rocky Boys Indian Reservation, located in north central Montana. Our total enrollment is over 7,000, including over 4,000 who live on the reservation. We are grateful for the historic investments this subcommittee has recently made in Indian country. We urge you to remember that Congress's trust and treaty responsibility to tribes exists irrespective of any self-imposed budgetary caps. It is imperative that this subcommittee appropriate the full amounts necessary to fulfill its obligations. I offer the following recommendations for your consideration. Chronic underfunding of the Indian health system has caused disproportionately high rates of obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, substance use disorders, and other preventable conditions. We urge the subcommittee to appropriate full and mandatory funding for the IHS at $54 billion, including $14 billion for hospitals and health clinics, $4.5 billion for mental health, and $5 billion for alcohol and substance use. We also strongly support transitioning contract support costs and Section 105L leases to mandatory spending. If mandatory appropriations cannot be achieved for FY25, we continue to support advance appropriations for the IHS in the short term. We urge the subcommittee to extend advance appropriations to all IHS accounts for FY26. We were disappointed to see that this subcommittee approved cuts to electronic health records modernization, healthcare facilities construction, and sanitation facilities construction in FY24. The Indian health system's infrastructure is among the oldest and most dilapidated in the country. Therefore, request that this subcommittee restore and fully fund these accounts at $6 billion. This includes $2 billion for sanitation facilities construction. Our citizens still do not have ready access to clean potable water. This creates significant health risks for the tribal members living on our reservation. We appreciate that Congress included a short-term extension of special diabetes programs for Indians in FY24, appropriations at an increased annualized rate. Given the great success of this program, Congress should reauthorize SDPI at $250 million annually with the option of receiving funds through self-government mechanisms. Our tribe has been devastated by the ongoing fentanyl epidemic. We are in dire need of in-community sober living homes and detox centers. This year, Congress only appropriated $2 million to fund essential detoxification-related services. That's less than $1 per IHS patient. We urge the subcommittee to dedicate resources to detoxification and re-emphasize the importance of fully funding the IHS. We also fully support the President's domestic supplemental request, which includes a $250 million investment in IHS to address the fentanyl epidemic. Like many tribes, we are seeing a drastic increase in drug trafficking on our lands. Congress needs to provide additional resources to the BIA, U.S. Attorney's offices, FBI, and other agencies to help us stem the flow of illegal drugs, investigate crimes, and prosecute offenders. We urge the subcommittee to provide $3 billion for BIA public safety and justice funding, with $2 billion for law enforcement and $1 billion for tribal courts. The Rocky Boys North Central Montana Regional Water System Project, funded through the Bureau of Reclamation, is critical to addressing the poor water quality on our reservation and surrounding communities. We are still waiting to receive safe drinking water as part of our 1998 water rights settlement. As portions of the tribal components of the infrastructure have been completed, the BI has been required to engage with the tribe and pay for the operations, maintenance, and repair. A trust fund was established to pay for OM&R costs, which have been sufficient to account for the interim costs while the tribe awaits water service. However, it is estimated to be drastically insufficient once the new water treatment plant and water system comes online, likely in 2027. At that time, additional funding will be required to pay for the BIA OM&R cost obligations, which would be several $million annually. We are actively working with the BIA to begin preparations for full-scale water system operations. Finally, we support moving away from competitive grants. Grants impose unnecessary, onerous administrative burdens and pit tribes against each other for resources we are all entitled to. This is entirely inconsistent with the federal trust responsibility. We join other tribal leaders in calling for direct funding for Indian country. You can find our full recommendation in our written testimony. We look forward to working with you to implement our requests. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Ashley?
Good morning, Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Ashley Dupree Weeks, and I'm the General Manager of the Assiniboine and Sioux Rural Water Supply System in northeastern Montana. There are 21 employees on the Fort Peck Indian Reservation that operates, maintains, and replaces this vital system that now serves a rural population of 18,500 persons and will serve 32,000 when the design capacity is reached in several future decades. We are an organization that has proven successful exercise of tribal sovereignty. This drinking water system supplies safe, high quality, and reliable drinking water from the Missouri River. A regional water treatment plant operated by my certified and highly capable staff delivers water through 3,200 miles of pipeline when completed, with multiple pumping plants and water storage tanks. The project serves an area that could cover 25% of the state of Maine. The construction of the project is 97% complete within the Fort Peck Indian Reservation and 88% complete in the area that we serve off the reservation, known as Dry Prairie, our non-Indian partners. The United States will invest $375 million in construction to complete the project, and Montana and Dry Prairie will invest an additional non-federal cost share of $47 million. I have the responsibility of operating, maintaining, and replacing the facilities on the reservation with a federal construction value of $239 million. The request we make of the subcommittee for funding in FY 2025 is $5.248 million, or 2.20% of the construction costs, a modest percentage. This is an increase over FY 2024 of $1,803,000. The committee is asked to consider the following factors. In my testimony last year, I requested $4.204 million, but the administration had only requested the FY 2023 amount, and $3.445 million was appropriated. The project was $759,000 short. We need to recover the $750,000 needed in FY 2024 appropriations, include another $750,000 $100,000 in FY 2025 appropriations to maintain what was needed in FY 2024, and increase our budget by $303,000 to cover inflation between FY 2024 and 2025. The annual increase in costs between FY 2024 and FY 2025 of $303,000 is due to inflation. Chemical costs between have increased year over year from $608,000 to $796,000 and account for most of the additional $303,000 requested. Power bills for treating and pumping water throughout the project increased from $379,000 to $420,000. 2 more employees are also needed to fill vacant points at a cost of about $150,000 for salaries, benefits, and payroll taxes. Chairman, the factors I have outlined account for the increase in funding needed for FY 2025. I thank the subcommittee for the continued support of OMR funding for the Assiniboine Sioux Rural Water Supply System as authorized by Public Law 106-382. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weatherwax.
Here we go. Good morning, Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Marvin Weatherwax Jr. I'm a member of the Blackfeet Tribal Business Council. I also serve as the chairman of the Coalition of Large Tribes and serve as a member of the Montana State Legislature in House District 15. Before I go any further, I want to extend my thanks and gratitude to the Leadership Committee, Committee Chair Tom Cole and Congressman Ryan Zinke, with respect to our Youth Center appropriation request from last year. That will be essential to the healing of the Blackfeet children. I appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony in support of funding of wastewater infrastructure for the Blackfeet tribe. The Blackfeet tribe is seeking funding to construct critical wastewater infrastructure for the Blackfeet Indian Reservation, which spans more than 1.6 million acres and is home to over 17,000 members in 5 reservation communities. We view the need for wastewater infrastructure as a priority to fulfill the purpose of the Blackfeet Indian Reservation under the Treaty of 1855, namely to be the permanent homeland for our Blackfeet people. The Blackfeet tribe has been subjected to enormous amounts of land loss stemming from the failed federal policy of the Dawes Act. The loss of our reservation land base occurred during the starvation winter of 1883. When our chiefs were coerced to sign another treaty to receive rations in exchange for 130,000 acres of land. In 1911, the Blackfeet were subject to the Blackfeet allotment, where another 156,000 acres were sold as surplus to non-natives. Our tribe asserts our treaty rights consistent with the original Blackfeet Treaty Reservation boundaries, which span from the eastern front of the Rocky Mountains to the Yellowstone National Park, bordered by the Yellowstone River on the south, all the way to what is now the North Saskatchewan River in the province of Alberta. As of today, our tribe has lost 90% of our original reservation due to the action of the U.S. federal government. Of note, we lost land to the establishment of Glacier National Park and the creation of the National Forest, which includes land sacred to the Blackfeet, the land known as the Badger to Medicine area. The existing Blackfeet Indian Reservation lands includes the headwater of the St. Mary's River, which is a tributary to the Mississippi River. The Army Corps of Engineers, without any consultation with the Blackfeet tribe, constructed a major pipeline project to divert water to support off-reservation non-Indian communities downstream. These non-Indian communities waters their crop, cattle, provide domestic water for their communities, and have done so for decades with Blackfeet water without any acknowledgement, much less any compensation for our senior rights to that very water. After nearly 4 decades of negotiation and work, in 2016, the United States enacted the Blackfeet Water Rights Settlement Act. However, that act does not include funding for wastewater. At the time, the Blackfeet tribe was informed by the administration that wastewater funding was not eligible to be included in the Indian Water Settlement. The Secretary's Indian Water Rights Office has now thought better about the United States investment in the approach to tribal water rights and now supports a wastewater funding in Indian water rights settlements, as evident by the Montana Water Protection Act, Confederated Salish and Kootenai Indian Water Rights Settlement, enacted by Congress in 2020. The administration's support for the Fort Belknap Indian Community Water Rights Settlement Act 2023, both of which have language supporting wastewater. All Blackfeet tribal communities suffer from dilapidated infrastructure and associated challenges, such as boil order mandates, expensive water hauling, and bottled water purchases. The Blackfeet tribal leadership has expended huge amounts of tribal resources to address emergency shutoffs, tribal officers, closures of essential government services, putting tribal members' health, safety, and welfare at risk due to water main breaks and non-drinkable water. Pallets of bottled water and portable toilets have been all too normal for the members and residents of the Blackfeet Reservation. The ability to update and provide new water and wastewater infrastructure will improve tribal members' health outcomes, where clean water and reliable wastewater has been shown to improve nutrition by accessing clean water and decreasing reliance on sugary drinks and avoid contaminated drinking water. Additionally, having clean water and reliable wastewater systems allow tribal members tend to be less exposed to illness for obvious reasons. Finally, the cost savings realized in avoiding bottled water and hauling water allows limited resources to be put to better use for things like food and housing. The Blackfeet people believe funding for the wastewater should be authorized and appropriated in order to achieve the same goals and objective of any Indian water rights settlement. I thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Ball?
Good morning, Chairman Simpson, Ranking Member Pingree, and members of the subcommittee. My name is George J. Ball, and I'm an Assiniboine representative of the Fort Belknap Indian Tribes of Montana. And I thank you today for this opportunity to testify before you. Our top priority is passage and funding of the Fort Belknap Indian Community Water Rights Settlement Act. The act affirms that our water rights settles our damage claims against the United States. In 1908, we went to court to fight for our water rights in the Winters case. The Supreme Court held that our treaty and reservation included the water we need to make a homeland. This is known as the Winters Doctrine. Under this doctrine, all tribes are able to produce, protect, and quantify their water rights. More than 100 years later, we still don't have our water rights, and the water projects the United States promised us are failing or simply were never built. More than 100 years, we negotiated a treaty and we agreed to give up vast lands and resources, but the United States did not provide the water and irrigation projects promised. Settling our water rights is a treaty and trust responsibility and is the supreme law of the land. Our water rights claims are currently pending in court. If we are forced to litigate, there is no question who will win. We have the oldest priority date, and our farmers, ranchers, and towns upstream from us will have to stop using our water. We would rather settle. We spent the last 30 years negotiating a fair and final settlement with the United States and the state of Montana. Our settlement is a win-win that provides water for all. Litigating 31,000 water rights claims would take another 30 years, would be a waste of taxpayers' money, and upset about 10% of Montana's gross domestic product. Settlement also provides the funding to fix water infrastructure that was built in the early 1900s. This aging water infrastructure threatens the economy, towns, and livelihoods of north central Montana, including more than 120,000 acres of non-Indian irrigation and more than 25,000 acres of reservation that feeds about 1 million people per year. This infrastructure also provides drinking water for more than 20,000 people. Our water settlement cost about $1.3 billion and passed the Senate last December. Our settlement has the full support of our tribes, the administration, the Montana Governor and Lieutenant Governor, the Rocky Mountain Tribal Leaders Council, the Milk River Joint Board of Control, the St. Mary Rehabilitation Working Group, local counties, water users, stockmen, conservation groups, tribal members, and more. The subcommittee should provide mandatory funding to implement our water settlement and other tribal water settlements. We need these funds to ensure that our settlement is final and enforceable. We need a stable and permanent fund, just like the DOJ settlement fund. We should not have to spend all this time negotiating a water settlement and then have to come back year after year for discretionary funds. We are played by the rules. We negotiated treaties and agreements with the United States. We agreed to settle on a reservations much smaller than our ancestral lands that sustained our tribes for generations. We spent the last 30 years negotiating a fair and final water settlement, and it is time for Congress and the subcommittee to do its part. Water is not our only priority. The United States does not provide the funding we need for basic law enforcement services on our reservation. We need significant increases for our law enforcement officers, court systems, and detention. All three of these must be working to keep our communities safe. Starting with law enforcement, our reservation is the size of Rhode Island. Rhode Island has more than 1,700 police officers. We have 9. Our officers travel across a large reservation and often have to respond to calls in remote areas without backup. With 9 officers, only a couple are on patrol at any given time. The crisis of missing and murdered indigenous women was identified long ago, but we still don't have the police officers we need. Now we have drug cartels setting up shop on our reservation. We need more federal resources and expanded tribal criminal jurisdiction to keep our communities safe. We need to increase pay to be competitive. We need a new police academy in the Montana-Dakota area to reduce training times so that we can develop our own police officers. Our courts are also underfunded. The laws require BIA to provide training and funding for all tribal courts. BIA needs to double or triple the funding to meet these requirements. Detention is also important. There's a detention facility near our reservation in Hardin, Montana that could hold 400 inmates. The BIA only had enough staff to house 20 inmates, and that means that many of our tribal members get shipped to Oklahoma, far from their families and support networks. This is not the right way to help them recover. The Broken Promises report released in 2018 found that funding for Indian programs is grossly inadequate to meet the most basic needs that the federal government committed to provide our tribes. This impacts social services, foster care, Head Start, and even our wildlife programs. These are very services that we need to help our people deal with meth addiction, address domestic violence, and to provide education for our children. The responsibility to provide funding for these programs starts right here in this subcommittee. We need you to champion Indian country and put forward funding that will meet our basic needs and will also meet the United States solemn promises to our tribes. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you very much. Ms. Pingree.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for your testimony. Really appreciated it. And you covered some of it, issues we've been talking about all day, the Indian Health Service, the fentanyl problem, the drug related issues, the lack of law enforcement. Your numbers about sort of comparing Rhode Island to your own tribal lands is really staggering when you think about those numbers, and then you understand why we have the problems with murdered and disappeared women, and also just the drug issues that continue to grow. And so we want to give a lot of focus to that, and I appreciate you talking about that. And also, thank you, everyone, to your focus on infrastructure. I just hesitate to think how many water settlements that we have let you drag on forever about. I mean, we just know how vital clean water sewage systems are, and we expect you to operate huge communities. Without that, it's staggering to me. So I hope we can get more of those settled and more of the funding out there, and that more of the money from the BIL and the other infrastructure money we've passed is going to some of the tribal communities to meet some of the backlog. And thank you for wearing your headdress. It really, I can't help myself. I'm just the whole time I'm like, I wonder what species that is. And it's really beautiful, magnificent. So appreciate that. And glad to hear you're also a representative to the legislature. That's so important to have that state representation as well. So really appreciate your all being here. Thank you.
Ms. McCollum.
Thank you. I like to look at maps, so I pulled up a map. So I spent a lot of summers in Montana and did a lot of fishing before the reclamation took place. I'm a lot older than you are, Ms. Weeks, in the Fort Peck area. So so when I pulled up the map, it shows your prime tribal water. What was and then the one below it that goes into Richland County, Sydney, that area where I spent all my summers. Is that part of it? Is that part of the Dry Creek that you're part of, or?
The dry Redwater, no, we're separate. On
You're
the
separate, so.
northern side of the Missouri River.
So what I'm looking at, on here that shows up on the Montana website probably isn't accurately describing the two divisions that you're talking about within
Right.
yours.
The Fort Peck Reservation is bordered there, and we are surrounded by our non-Indian partners, the Dry Prairie Rural Water System to the north, east, and west of us.
They mention it, but they don't divide it. They don't show the division on the map. So when, Mr. Ball, when you were talking about your water settlement and getting things in, so you look at the map of Montana, and there's only four regional water settlements areas where everything's kind of interconnecting in that. How do you fit in with the state doing its share when I don't see any regional water connections to where some of your tribes are located? Does that make your systems more expensive? Are you so located that it doesn't make sense to join with neighboring cities? You've got mountains as you move to the west, and that Montana is very different west to east. So I just want to understand better about some of your connections, because I understand Fort Peck's.
Well, the headwaters of the Milk River, they start up in Glacier.
Okay, so you regulate.
And it flows downstream into the Missouri River.
Okay.
So that covers the whole region of north central Montana.
Wow. Huge.
Yes.
Huge. Please.
I think the reason why we haven't, I'm sorry. I kind of think that the reason why we haven't joined any of the tribes have, because we view everybody else as customers.
Oh, okay.
So that's the.
Okay. They don't have the unique relationship that you've been able to set up in northeastern Montana.
Right, and that is, I think, a very successful point in our system is having our partners on the off-reservation portions in 4 surrounding counties. Strong leadership for several years, bringing this regional water system together.
And I know that the water in your area, Ms. Weeks, is very heavy with iron. Is that true as you move west?
No, ma'am. At my house, you can make coffee with the water, and you don't have to use sugar. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. No, our water is pretty good. It's just when it gets into the municipalities, that's when it kind of, because we have to have water treatment plants, and
right.
But like myself, I'm on a well. I'm actually hooked into a underground aquifer, so my water's really good.
Okay.
So
thank you.
Well, thank you all very much. I think for those who have just come in here, we have this conversation every year. It's very basic. It's about sovereignty, treaty adherence, water, food, health, security, and roads, the foundations of life. And we need to work harder at fulfilling all of our obligations to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Time for panel number 6 with Cherie Wright-Plank, Irvin Carlson, and Frank Starr comes out. That gets all of us. Thank you all for coming out again today. Panel 6 is Sherry Wright Plank from the Rosebud Sioux Tribe, Irvin Carlson, the president of the Intertribal Buffalo Council. Frank Starr comes out, president of the Oglala Sioux Tribe. It's good to see you again, and we'll start off with Sherry Wright Plank. The floor is yours, ma'am.
Chante washte nape chuzape. We on washte we imachiapi. Nahawashichu iapi. Sherry Wright Plank imachiapi. I greet you with a heartfelt handshake. My name is Sherry Wright Plank. My Lakota name is Pretty Woman. I come to you, honorable members of the U.S. House Appropriations Committee on Interior, Environment, and Related Agencies. I have the honor of serving as a council member for the Rosebud Sioux Tribal Council in South Dakota. Unfortunately, President Herman can't be here today, so I'm here charged by the tribe to state some of our serious needs to the esteemed committee. Today I stand before the committee to present our fiscal year 2025 appropriations priorities, focusing on matters of public safety and justice that are paramount to our tribal community. And before I go through this written document, I want to really iterate that one of the biggest hurdles in Indian country for recruitment, retention, and funding is the fact that our local economies really suffer. We don't have tax funding. We're all on trust land. A lot of the setup of our reservation is spread out. For Rosebud Reservation, it's 20 communities on 1 million acres of land. So one community, our furthest community is 185 miles apart from one end of the reservation to the other, which makes it very difficult to support any transportation, like community transportation, and any business strips as well to try and promote economic development. And the reason that's key is because it makes it difficult for us to recruit our doctors, police officers, all of that. So I just wanted to say that's why we're here today asking for the funding. It's not funding that we can just raise locally or appropriate ourselves through tribal government with tax funding, because we don't have that. For the Rosebud Sioux Tribe, the only tax revenue that we do get is about $2 million a year, and that goes to fund several other programs that have been operating for several years. The Rosebud Sioux Tribe has recently declared an Indian country law enforcement emergency, underscoring the urgent need for heightened attention and resources to address the pressing issues we face. We have actively advocated for this cause, promoting the enactment of NCAI Resolution number 23-066, which calls on the Congress and President to undertake Emergency Indian Country Law Enforcement Initiative. Through engagements such as Tribal Nation Leaders Summit with the Attorney General Garland and the DOJ Office of Justice Program and the BIA Office of Justice Services meeting, we have gained critical insights. And it is evident that the current funding allocated to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Tribal Police, approximately $565 million nationwide, falls significantly short meeting the real law enforcement needs in Indian country. And that's apparent. For the record, this paper we submitted, that says we have 15 tribal officers. We have 25. So the correction there. The Rosebud Sioux Tribe, we currently have 25 officers. We urgently require an additional 20 officers, at least 4 more dispatchers and detention personnel to effectively manage community policing. This past year, we had 28,000 calls for service in our communities. Our community is on the grip of a profound public safety and public health crisis driven by drug trafficking, violent crime, and inadequate law enforcement projection. The Rosebud Sioux Tribe has half the tribal police officers with twice the population and 3 times the violent crime suffered back in the year 2000. The Great Plains region, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Nebraska is facing a public public safety and public health emergency resulting from drug trafficking, violent crime, and lack of adequate protection of our communities, reflected in the following: a severe increase in violent crimes, drug-related crime, and drug distribution-related violent crimes. Native Americans suffer the highest level of fatal opioid drug overdoses. Native American methamphetamine abuse and related crimes occur at 3 times the national average, and drastic increases in hard drugs, including fentanyl and heroin. Homicide rates per 100,000 population at the highest levels in America. The Rosebud Sioux tribe suffers the highest levels of suicide in America. The Rosebud Sioux tribe has experienced severe increases in aggravated assault, sexual assaults, and firearm-related incidents. The Rosebud Sioux tribe, in alignment with the 1868 treaty, implores Congress to fulfill its commitment to ensuring the peace and safety of our communities by funding tribal law enforcement, public safety, and tribal administration of justice under Public Law 93-638. We acknowledge the diligence of this committee in understanding the legal obligations and the historical content that necessitate federal funding to support and nurture Indian reservation economies. Our tribe, with nearly 40,000 tribal members and approximately 30,000 residing on the reservation, grapples with the repercussions of public safety crisis daily. While we strive for economic development, the pervasive issue of drugs and alcohol abuse continues to hinder our progress. The Rosebud Sioux Tribe Law Enforcement Services is charged with ensuring law and order within the boundaries of the Rosebud Sioux Tribe and to trust lands in Malek, Tripp, and Lyman and Gregory counties. So we have a 5-county reservation. RST Law Enforcement responds to over 20,000 calls for service every year. RST Law Enforcement Services serves an area of approximately 1 million acres, or roughly 1,500 square miles, with only 25 patrol officers, 5 criminal investigators. The national average to officer person ratio is 3.5 per every 1,000 persons, whereas RST LES officer person ratio is 1 person every 1,000, 1 officer every 1,000 person. And with that too, I also want to say that the call time, so if you call the police, you can wait anywhere from a half hour to 45 minutes before an officer arrives, which could in some instances mean life or death. So I just want to mention that. The Rosebud Sioux Tribe declared a state of emergency due to methamphetamine, opioid, and fentanyl epidemic plaguing the reservation. The RST law enforcement responds to a high volume of violent crimes. Illegal narcotics, alcohol are both contributing factors around 95% of the time. RST LES administration has repeatedly called for a request in base funding. We haven't had a base funding increase since 1994 when we 638 contracted our law enforcement services. So it's been the same. And with inflation and cost of living increases, it hasn't helped with retention much at all either. As last stated by our president, Scott Herman, the BIA law enforcement should be at least funded at $1.2 billion, and that's net for the nation. As last year's delayed FY24 appropriations, the funding remains 100% underfunded. While the country grapples with increased drug and human trafficking, tribes remain a gap in the law enforcement effort, a gap that the federal government is obligated to close. Rosebud reiterates that the funding for the BIA tribal police and justice system should be increased as follows: $1.2 billion for BIA Office of Justice Services and tribal police officers, $150 million to redress murdered and missing Indigenous persons, $300 million for BIA detention and public safety construction programs, and $400 million for tribal courts, prosecutors, probation officers, diversion programs, and prevention programs. Specifically, the Rosebud Sioux Tribe requires an increase in the tribal police budget from $3.5 million FY 2025 for 20 to support 20 new tribal police officers and 4 dispatchers and detention officers. In addition, the Rosebud Sioux tribe also needs $500,000 for our tribal courts with our high caseload, and that kind of piled up from COVID. It backed up. So the Rosebud Sioux tribe with Yankton Sioux tribe has also advocated for a regional BIA law enforcement academy for the Upper Plains to help recruit for much needed officers. Artesia is too far away from our communities, and it's also very hard to get in. Sending these recruits to such a distance for an extended period removes them from the communities they intend to serve and the families they want to protect. A regional academy hosted at the State Law Enforcement Center in Pierre, South Dakota, would allow recruits to remain near their families and communities, while joint classes with the state officers would build relationships between our law enforcement agencies. This year, our advocacy efforts at the state level for support of Regional Academy achieved unanimous passage in both House and Senate of House Concurrent Resolution HCR 6011, urging the Bureau of Indian Affairs Law Enforcement to establish Law Enforcement Training Academy in South Dakota. The Rosebud Sioux tribe also requests your help to help secure funding for our Indian Health Services. Our hospital is 30 years old. It's outdated and lost its functionality. With the loss of hospital functionality, we have lost medical staff and our patient confidence and loyalty. Due to poor health care provided by the Rosebud Sioux tribe, our people have poor health status. The Robert Wood Johnson County by County Health Assessment shows that the Rosebud Sioux Reservation ranks at the bottom of the poor health status.
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up. We're about 7 minutes over time.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so I guess for the tribe requests, $300 million for IHS, $5 million for alcohol and drug treatment programs, and $300 million for the Rosebud Sioux Tribal Hospital replacement. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Irwin?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Again, good morning, Mr. Chairman and honorable members of the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee. My name is Irwin Carlson, and I'm a member of the Blackfeet Nation, and also I'm the president of the Intertribal Buffalo Council. I stand before you today on behalf of 83 federally recognized tribes to inform you of our important work to restore buffalo to tribal lands and to heal our people and provide environmental benefits to our lands. American Indian tribes were sustained by the buffalo prior to the arrival of non-Indians to this country. Buffalo were central to the lifeways of tribal people as they provided the opportunity for tribes to be self-sustaining. Buffalo provided food, shelter, and clothing for us, but most importantly, they provided us with a purpose and became a central figure to our culture and our religious practices. To this day, you will hear our people, our Indian people, referring to the buffalo as our relative. They are sacred to us. Historians tell us there were once between 30 and 60 million buffalo living in what is now North America. As the Indians were moved and restricted to reservations, buffalo were hunted by non-Indian buffalo hunters, resulting in millions and millions of our buffalo being slaughtered. The destruction was so complete by the late 1800s, only a few buffalo remained. As the great chief Sitting Bull observed, a cold wind blew across the prairie when the last buffalo fell, a death wind for my people. Indeed, the population of the Indian people, once numbering in the millions, was estimated to have dropped to 250,000 by the early 1900s. Without the buffalo, Indians lost their historical lifestyle and independence. And in the early reservation days, many starved to death. Thanks to the efforts of early conservationists that recognized that buffalo were a keystone species to North America, including Teddy Roosevelt, and some Indian tribal leaders who didn't get the publicity that Roosevelt did, the buffalo were brought back from the brink of extinction. For the Indian people, recovery from this devastation or restoration of buffalo herds on our lands began in earnest in 1991, when a handful of Indian tribes organized the Intertribal Bison Cooperative, and now known as the Intertribal Buffalo Council. Our organization has grown significantly, and today I'm proud to tell you that we have 83 tribes in 21 states, all dedicated to restoring herds on our lands. The Indian population of our members' tribes exceeds 1 million. ITBC has received federal appropriations since 1992 in the form of earmarks, inclusion in the President's budgets, or through DOI administrative action. However, despite the growth in our membership, our funding has been stagnant, about 1.4 million. These funds, which are the only funds directly allocated to these Indian tribes, fall critically short of meaningful assistance to tribes for restoration efforts. Federal funding directly to tribes is a fraction of the support for fishing tribes to access and co-manage fish, even though courts have recognized the federal responsibility to assist all tribes with access to traditional food sources. While fishing tribes work to conserve and co-manage, we are still working to restore our buffalo. ITBC did get a boost this year through the funding made available via the secretarial order on bison. But unless this committee acts, that is likely only to be a one-time allocation. ITBC awards funds to tribes to determine how best to use them for restoration and management efforts as exercises of tribal sovereignty. ITBC recently conducted a needs assessment, and our member tribes provided a cumulative response of 17 million. This is the realistic base for tribal herd development grants for buffalo restoration efforts. I am respectfully asking this committee to appropriate in fiscal year 25, 17 million for herd development, 2 million to continue ITBC conservation work with national parks, 100,000 for health-related research, and 500,000 for education and outreach to tribal youth for a total of 19.6 million. We are also working to create a permanent statutory authorization for tribal buffalo restoration that will avoid the current discretionary funding that has limited the creation of tribal buffalo industry for true restoration and move towards self-sustainable herds and economic returns. In the last Congress, the late Don Young, together with a dozen bipartisan colleagues, introduced and secured passage of the Indian Buffalo Management Act through the House. This year, Congressman Lamalfa and Peltola, together with a bipartisan group of members, have once again introduced that legislation, and it has been ordered to report it out of the House Natural Resources Committee. Senators Heinrich, Mullen, and others have introduced it in the Senate, where we are awaiting a hearing before the Indian Affairs Committee. Honorable members, committee members, we hope that you will see clear to fund our request at 19.6 million. We have some success to date, but not much. But much more is needed. We are regularly transporting surplus buffalo from our national parks to Indian tribes, hoping to create or diversify herds, and in so doing, help out both the parks and our members. We need your help to enhance the restoration of buffalo to tribes and the recovery of our people. I would like to say, even though that we have had an increase, a small increase for one time, I've been here many times I think my hair was a different color when I first came here. And,
Mine too.
and our funding has stayed stagnant, and our numbers have grown of our tribes that have joined the organization. Many, many tribes feel it very important for these herds. And I know we have a lot of other issues on Indian country and that are paramount, but these are also very, very important to our culture and returning our culture and helping us heal from all of the things that are happening on the other areas in our tribes. So I really respectfully asking you to help us with the healing of bringing back our buffalo and the healing of our people.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Frank?
Yes, good morning, Ranking Member, ma'am, sir. We meet again. My name is Frank Starr, comes out. I'm the president of Oglala Sioux Tribe. A Marine Corps veteran of the Gulf War in Mogadishu, Somalia. Today I serve my people. Many of you are familiar with our tribe and the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. I know some of you have visited our lands. We invite you back. Our reservation is roughly 3.1 million acres, and our enrollment membership is over 52,000. We have tremendous untapped potential on our reservation. However, the chronic underfunding for the United States to carry out its peace treaty and trust obligations has taken an enormous toll on us. We look to you to uphold the U.S. peace treaties and its obligations. We need you to continue your work to fulfill funding shortfalls so that our people can enjoy the same quality of life and opportunities enjoyed by all other Americans. My written testimony is comprehensive. Today, I will highlight a few priorities. First, the tribe is in the midst of a dire public safety crisis. We implore the subcommittee to reset the base funding for law enforcement and fully fund our law enforcement. Our acting chief of police will be testifying later with details. Next, I bring to your attention our health needs. We have a priority list. The priority is specialty care. We need specialized doctors. We only have one podiatrist, 2 dentists for our whole reservation. We also need specialists in mental and behavioral health care. Our reservation, we suffer from a much higher than average suicide rates. Having specialists would decrease the number of patients being referred out and save the IHS money in the long run. When our patients are referred out for care, they are left on their own. The families turn to the tribe to help cover gas money and to get them home and for hotel stays while they visit their loved ones in the hospital. As a tribe, we support our tribal members in this way, but we need resources to do so. We ask you to appropriate funds at levels that support fully staffing at our facilities and to legislate for enticements for healthcare workers to come work for us. We also need ambulances. We have 3 for our entire reservation. One is dedicated solely for transporting patients from our hospital to Rapid City for care. So actually, we only have 2 to serve our large reservation. We also ask for direct funding to upgrade certain of our community water systems and 6 wastewater lagoons. Our priority need for us is roads, equipment. Our current fleet is outdated and some is decrepit. It costs us thousands of dollars each time we repair equipment. It quickly eats up our allotted budget for emergency repairs. Finally, funding the Tiwahi initiative is critical to our tribe. We urge the subcommittees to meet the President's funding request for Tiwahi so that the new sites, of which we are one, can gain parity. Also, general assistance is also a priority for our tribe, and it's so important for our members. In closing, we are a people rich in history, culture, and traditions, and one of the largest tribes in the nation. But we are the poorest reservation in the country. With that, I'd like to thank you, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you. Buffalo's certainly a big issue. We always see some requests from members and stuff for buffalo restoration and stuff, and certainly important in my part of Idaho and stuff. I'm tempted to ask you, but I don't know if you'd know the answer to this or not. But I grew up in Blackfoot, Idaho. Any relationship to the Blackfoot Indians? Nobody knows how Blackfoot, Idaho became Blackfoot, Idaho. It used to be Grove City, and then it became Blackfoot, Idaho, and there's all sorts of stories out there, but nobody really knows. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, thank you. Ms. Pingree?
Yep, thank you very much for your testimony, and I really appreciate both of the South Dakota tribes that are talking about the, all of the issues that we know are so important, but particularly you're sort of detailing the law enforcement crisis and how significant this is. And obviously, we've heard this from many tribes, but when you're talking about the area that you're, both of your reservations cover is just staggering. I looked up some of the numbers, and this is part of why we're going to hear about this all day today, that right now it's estimated that our funding of BIA covers 13% of the need across the country. So 13% of the need is a drop in the bucket when you're dealing with the crises that you've got. I know this budget request from the administration is another $95 million, which would certainly be helpful if we're able to do that, but the estimated need is actually $3 billion nationwide. So we are not even beginning to give you the level of assistance that you need, What's that? 3.3. So there, I stand corrected. But I hope we can do more with that, and also more with the health issues. The idea that you have 3 ambulances to cover the territory that you've got is completely insignificant. So thank you so much for detailing the challenges, and I hope we can offer more support. And I, too, as a strong supporter of the buffalo, and also even more so have really tried to work on issues related to, food as medicine, getting people able to connect with the traditional foods, and certainly the buffalo is such a significant role. And when you look at the pictures of the slaughter that happened in the late 1800s, it's really unfathomable. Such a majestic species and so fundamental. So I hope we can do more. I don't know that we'll get 19.2 million or whatever the number was, but I can see that bumping it up would really make a huge difference. And I'm so happy to hear that more and more tribes are getting engaged and involved. So if there's anything that we can do to support that, I hope we can. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
It's like in the 1800s when they slaughtered all these buffalo, that was how we were going to control the tribes, by controlling their food supply and stuff, or eliminating their food supply, and they'd consequently have to go to reservations and stuff like that. But it was, and from what I understand, as we've been out and visited, it's been a few years since we've been out to some of the different reservations, the Rosebud and others, but one of the best ways to treat diabetes is through getting back to traditional foods. And that's one of the most effective means that we've got on treating the diabetes that is highest among Indians than it is any other subpopulation of the country. So anyway, thank you for all you do. Thanks for being here today. I appreciate it very much. Panel 7, Chief Frank Adams and Chief Stephen Adkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for the hospitality and the privilege to testify. I have not testified before one of this committee before, but I'm looking forward to the task. First, my name is Frank Adams. I'm chief of the Upper Mattaponi tribe in King William County, Virginia. We're one of the 6 tribes that became recognized in 2018. So we're newbies. But we fought for decades to obtain federal recognition. And some of our accomplishments have been that we were one of the first of the 6 tribes to put land into trust. We were basically a landless tribe until we got federally recognized, but we have put some small portion of property into trust, so we have begun our reservation. But we do have an issue because since getting federally recognized, it was suggested by BIA that we update and rewrite our Constitution, which we did over a 2-year span. We put a lot of thought into it. But our tribal constitution calls for a tribal court. So we did our due diligence and made a request for 638 funding with the Eastern Region BIA in Nashville, Tennessee, only to be rejected and told that they didn't have any funding for tribal judicial systems. So we appealed that decision and were rejected again, simply because they didn't have the funds. As a result of that, I feel like the Upper Mattaponi tribe and all the Virginia tribes are treated unfairly. It seems that since we were recognized in 2018, we are penalized for coming to the table late. But the law is clear. Indian self-determination, all tribes are able to contract with BIA. The Thomasina-Jordan Act, the act that established our federal recognition status, states that the tribe and all of its citizens shall be eligible for all service and benefits afforded to federally recognized Indian tribes. That's written in the law. And then the Indian Reorganization Act saying that there is no difference between tribes. Again, that is law. But my ask today is that the BIA Eastern Region be funded appropriately to support the Upper Mattaponi tribe's justice system, as well as the other Virginia tribes who will most certainly be following behind us in establishing their own court and establishing their own reservations. With that, I say thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you.
I guess this afternoon. Good afternoon, Chairman Simpson and Ranking Member Pingree. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today on behalf of the Chickahominy Indian Tribe. My name is Stephen Atkins. I am chief of the Chickahominy Indian Tribe. And I'm accompanied here today by Wayne Atkins, my first assistant chief. Wayne, if you'd raise your hand. The Chickahominy Indian Tribe is located not far from here along the Chickahominy River in Charles City County, Virginia, near homelands that we have inhabited over 1,000 years. Despite our long and intertwined history with the United States, our tribe was only recently recognized on January 29, 2018, Public Law 115-121. Since that time, our tribe has worked with this committee and the administration to establish and fund our federal priorities and build out our tribal capacity and infrastructure. So our first request is to increase the funding for a new tribe, which turns out to be transition to tribal priority allocation funding for the tribes. And we're asking for funding at a minimum of $1 million. You may want to ask why. During COVID, it was determined that every tribe should get at least $1 million. And I think that logic still holds today. We need those funds to build the infrastructure that we need, such as social services, education, law enforcement, and health care, among others. So for the first 3 years after acknowledgement, tribes are allocated the new tribes funding. But guess what? The new tribe funding is based on a population of less than 1,700 members for $160,000. From 17,000 to 1,700, to 3,500, the funding is determined on a case-by-case basis for those tribes with population over 3,500. So for tribes with less than 1,700, it's 160,000. And for tribes 1,700 to some number a little bit above that, it's 320,000. It's impossible to stand up those, the infrastructure that we need to achieve the self-determination of Public Law 93-638 with additional funding. So the amount of new tribe funding and tribal priority allocation funding for new tribes is not sufficient, as I said, to stand up government structure needed to carry out all of the programs that we need, and I stress health care, law enforcement, and social services. So to obtain federal funding and implement federal programs requires substantial resources. As newly recognized tribes, we are competing with tribes that already have experienced personnel and resources to obtain and carry out grants and implement programs. And I'll submit we're better than we were when you used bake sales and car washes to generate income. But this is not sufficient to help us get where we need to be. So the measure of population with new tribes and tribal priority allocation funding does not equate to the needs and should not be used as a basis for our tribal funding. And incidentally, we don't have the expertise in-house to write these grants, these competitive grants, with real measure of success. So another reason we need funding to help stand us up so that we can actually compete for those funds, that are there for tribes. So our tribe is aggressively working to build capacity. But today, many of us wear 2 to 3 hats to cover the responsibilities that are there. So that brings me to our second priority: mandatory funding for the Indian Self-Determination and Educational Assistance Act 105L program. I would first like to thank this committee for having the vision to support and to fund the Section 105 program. This lease program allows tribes to enter into leases with the Department of the Interior or the Indian Health Service and receive funding facilities used to carry out self-governance programs. We long since outgrew our tribal center, which now houses our governmental office. Our tribe is excited to enter in this program for the buildings that we currently use to carry out social services and tribal government programs, and we've been participants in the program since 2023. We consider the Section 105L program a way to exercise our self-governance as a newly recognized tribe, and we see the potential for this lease revenue to help us address the lack of federal funding available to new tribes. For one reason, for a reason, go on to the commercial market for funding, living on reserved land, banks aren't that keen to lend the funding. And if we have this revenue stream, the 105L, at least we can use that to help us attract funds to build the infrastructure that we need. So as more and more tribes exercise their self-determination by entering into the 105L program, the funding needed to honor those leases has the potential of disrupting funding for other programs at the department that are also much needed. So, we don't want to, borrow from Peter to pay Paul. We want to make sure that what we get doesn't deprive other needed areas. And this, to me, looks like a way to ensure that does not happen. The intent of the 105L program was not to compete with other federal programs, but to offer a way for tribes to carry out self-governance programs and construct the necessary infrastructure to implement those programs. And again, this would help us attract the necessary capital. So For the Chickahominy tribe, the mandatory funding would offer much-needed security for us to obtain the financing needed to construct a new administration building, which we sorely need. As we expand our federal footprint, we are already at capacity for the space we need for our program, employees, tribal council, and community meetings. We appreciate this committee's commitment and understanding of our tribal funding needs and the opportunity to speak directly to those needs during today's hearing. We know that you have difficult decisions to make, but we hope you will consider the priorities that the Chickahominy tribe have requested today. Thank you for your time and your attention.
I thank you both for your testimony and for bringing up the subject, because it's frankly something that I have not really thought about, the needs of newly recognized tribes and stuff and the challenges that they face. So I appreciate you bringing that up, and it's certainly something we will look at when, at least I'll have my attention focused on a little bit more when we write this bill and stuff. But I'm not, I appreciate the information, but I'm not smart enough to ask a question that's, I'm sure some will come up as I think more about this.
But feel free to reach out. I'll provide my phone number, and anytime you need more information, I'll be willing to answer. But I just appreciate you entertaining us today. And I didn't use the microphone. I think you heard what I said, though.
Ms. Pingree?
But we're open for questions beyond today if you're so
Great,
inclined.
thank you. And I concur with the chair. Learned a lot about the challenges that a new tribe faces, and I'll look forward to working on the issues with you, and we'll certainly can get back in touch on that, so thank you.
Kind of
Mr.
seems
Chair.
strange to call them a new tribe, huh?
I know,
They've
I
been
know.
here for longer than
We know you're probably not new, yeah. But I'm,
newly recognized
yeah,
tribe.
congratulations on being recognized. I'm sure
We
that
were
was,
forced off our homeland in 1646, so that Trail of Tears.
been waiting a while.
The template was set in what's now the Commonwealth of Virginia back in 1646.
Wow. Well, thank you for being with us.
Thank you all for taking the time to be here this morning, and we sincerely appreciate all of you coming to testify before our committee. Committee stands adjourned until 1 p.m. Thank you.